We want to try to get started on time and go to afford our speakers as much opportunity on time as we can for them to speak. I think we've got a lot of information that we're going to cover today. And on behalf of the Senate and House Technology Committee, we'd like to welcome everyone to this joint session of hearings on artificial intelligence. I know it's a word out there we're all hearing about. We hope on the other side of this, we've got a little bit more understanding of what all is going on. I'd like to thank all our speakers for coming. We've got things coming, hopefully not as bad as we're planning for, but they're coming. So I thank everybody for the time and the effort that they spent coming to these meetings today. I'd like to ask a point of personal privilege before we begin. I'd like to take just a moment in silent prayer, if y'all don't mind, to just remember what happened 23 years ago today. As you know, today is September 11th. So if you'll pray with me silently for a minute. Thank you. And all God's people said, amen. Thank you for that. Well, we're going to start. Our first speaker today is Superintendent Chris Chisholm of the Pearl County Schools. And most of us had the privilege to spend a little bit of time with him. And this man knows about AI. He's going to kind of start generally and tell us what it is, and we'll go from there. Mr. Chisholm, floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I just say I'm honored to be here, to even be asked to be here to speak on this. And understand, I am not the utmost expert on AI. I can tell you I've been following this for about 6 or 7 years and kind of jumped in. And I will tell you, you guys, this is the presentation number 88 for me since November on this. I've done this for school districts all over the state, just in the way, and really any others as well. It's not just school districts. Done this for bankers, attorneys, all different manners of groups across the area, just to show people how this can be used to your benefit. So I'm very, very thankful to be asked to be here today. So I will jump into this. First of all, they asked me to bring some of the tools, some of the cool tech tools that I use on a pretty regular basis. So I'm going to start with that. So if anybody's pulled out your phone, just raise your hand quickly if you've had something strange going on with your phone the last maybe 15 or 20 minutes. Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm sorry, you folks in the crowd as well. It probably happened to you as well. So what I'm doing is I'm spamming your phones right now. And this is actually a part of my presentation a little bit later, but I did want you to see this, and I usually like to start off with it. It's a really good attention getter. And I will tell you, I'm going to stop right now. You may have seen pop-ups for all kinds of stuff. Connect to Bluetooth, connect to Apple TVs, connect to whatever. These devices are about $130 or $140. They're really cheap. And I say cheap, they're affordable for kids. They're affordable for adults. Let me tell you a few other things that this will do, just so you're aware. If you're outside and you have a vehicle, I would say probably at least 4 or 5 years old, if you hit that unlock button on your car, if I'm within about 30 feet, I can grab your signal, I can unlock your car. If you go to your house and you decide to hit that garage door opener, if I'm within about 40 or 50 feet, I can grab that signal, I can grab your garage door opener. There's a lot of things that this thing will do that aren't bad, but kind of like a vehicle or anything else, or even using AI. It can be used the wrong way and it can be used the right way. We use this in the district to do a lot of really positive things, but there are some things that are pretty bad with this. So this is one tech tool. This is called the Flipper Zero. If you want to write that down or go look it up, it's pretty neat. And again, this is also the reason that if you're in airports or other places that you never, ever, ever connect to a public Wi-Fi. I can actually kick everybody in here off the Wi-Fi network, and I can pretend to be the network here. Then anything that you send through your phone is going to go through this for me, and I can catch every bit of that data. So again, just a tech tool that I usually start off with. Got a couple more. I don't know if you guys have seen these. These are Meta glasses. And again, for us in the education world, this can be problematic. Obviously, these are, and it's going to start talking to me in a second. These are connected to Meta's AI. You can actually speak to this just like you can your car or anything else. The other thing that can happen, if I hit this button right here, I just took a picture of everybody in here. I can hold this down and you probably see a light come on the side. You can turn that on or off. If somebody knows what they're doing, they can actually live stream this directly to YouTube, or they can video with this. So really, really neat technology that you can use as well. But again, for us in our world, this can become problematic because it's not just sunglasses. They can put this in almost any type of glass. It doesn't matter what it is. So another pretty cool tech tool that I use quite a bit. And then there's another one. If you haven't seen this, this is also called the Plod Note. You might be interested in this for multiple reasons. This will actually, by a magnet, go on the back of your phone. and it will record your phone calls if that's what you choose to do. The second thing that it will do is will give you a full transcript of that phone call. On top of that, it will actually take and make notes based off that phone call. So for kids that are in college, it's a fabulous tool. You can sit there and the professor says whatever they want. It will make notes for you. The third thing it will do for a student also is do something called a mind map, to where it makes it visual for you. So not just the notes, but again, this is connected to artificial intelligence. And when I'm talking about artificial intelligence, I'm talking about language models. So you're gonna hear me talk about ChatGPT today. That's what I tend to use for multiple reasons. But in the end, that is what's changed in the world of AI. So anyway, those are just a few tech tools. I've got one more I'll show you as we get through the presentation as well. We'll jump right into this. And if you know anything about me, if you know my dad was a representative for many years over in the House. And I am very much like him. I talk with my hands and I'm used to moving around. I'm not used to having to sit right here at a microphone. So I apologize if I'm moving a little. Don't worry about the agenda. Pay attention to what this guy says. This is really important.
Of the AI age. There's this chart that keeps popping up that hits extra hard, which is the time to reach 100 million users. And you can see the faster and faster adoption curves of these increasingly disruptive new technologies. So the telephone took 75 years to hit this milestone 100 million number. Then the mobile phone reached the same mark in just 16 years. Netflix took only 10 years, and Twitter took 6, and Gmail only took 5. Facebook in 48-ish months was absolutely massive. Instagram hit it in just 30 months. Now, TikTok, we view as this gigantic existential threat, 9 months to 100 million users. ChatGPT, 2 months.
So I'm going to stop right there. There's more to this video, but the point is, you can see in just a couple of months, it reached 100 million users. And I don't know if you heard what he said. He said this is a disruptive technology. And I think if you're paying attention to what's going on in the United States and around the world, you will understand that this is a very disruptive technology. And that's not necessarily in a bad way. There's many ways that it's a good disruption. I can tell you that it makes people a lot more efficient. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. And I'm going to show you some of that very specifically tomorrow in part of my presentation.
Of the AI.
So we're going to jump through this. Little known fact, this has been around since the 60s. You know, artificial intelligence, what's changed since November of 2022 when ChatGPT became the first publicly available language model. That is the first language model within AI. AI has been around. All the algorithms that you see and all the things that you will see, and we're going to discuss real quick. Again, in the 60s, that was your first generation AI. You know, it didn't work very well. It's okay. It's rules-based. It's based on your computer, right? It's only as good as the inputs. Your second generation, that's going to be your context-based AI. That's Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa, Amazon, all of these. So I ask this question every time. Is Amazon pretty good at picking out things for you? Most of it right. Do you think there's somebody sitting on the other side of that computer going, you know, I think Chris needs some outdoor furniture? Absolutely not. They're using algorithms to do that. That is a type of AI as well. Your third generation, that's your narrow domain. That's your stock market. Most people don't realize that 70% of the trades that are made on the stock market are done with algorithms. So that is a type of AI as well. Your weather and elections, healthcare, all of those things are narrow domain AIs. Where we are today is fourth generation. And I can tell you, we are already on the precipice of the next generation as well. But this is reasoning AI. This is understanding pictures, understanding language, understanding audio, and now as they move forward, they're understanding video as well. So the question becomes, what's next? That is your artificial general intelligence, which is fifth generation. It can perform a task, any task that a human can do, just 1,000 times faster. And also, it can understand, learn, and apply knowledge. And again, I'm going to show you some videos of what that looks like. We are right on the cutting edge of being able to do that now. Also, what happens after that? And again, this is not according to me, this is according to science. You're going to see sixth generation, that is your super intelligent AI. This is where AI basically starts creating other AIs. That's what it ultimately amounts to. This is at the point that things start taking off in a direction that we can't control. Seventh generation self-aware AI that's using quantum algorithms to simulate human consciousness. Eighth generation transcendent, it can create new life forms. And again, ninth generation is cosmic AI. And it talks about interstellar exploration. And it's really not talking about sending ships out deep into hundreds of thousands of light years away. What it's talking about is using collective intelligence to make sense of the world based on what we know in the physics world. So there's some other things. Now, according to OpenAI, here's what they say is next for them. I thought this was really interesting, so I put it in. Your level 1 is your chatbots. That's what opened up in November of 2022. Your level 2 is reasoners. They have human level problem solving. And again, you're going to see some of that shortly in a couple of videos. Level 3, that is agents, systems that can take action. Level 4 is innovators. Level 5, again, that is full organizations that are run by AI. It's a little bit scary. You know, some people look at this and go, oh my goodness, are we really moving that direction? The answer is yes. And I can tell you this, it's not only coming, it's coming like a train. If people aren't paying attention, it's going to pass you by. And I put this in here because I truly believe this. This is the new industrial revolution. And why do I say that? Automation, innovation, new industries are going to pop up. And I can assure you some industries that we have are going to go away. And I think in the education world, we have to be prepared for that. It's our job to prepare kids to walk into this market. Productivity increase, economic impacts that you will see, and again, global reach with job transformations all over the place. So I'm asked this all the time, is AI going to replace humans? I answer that carefully. Some of them, yes, it will. There's absolutely no question. People that use AI are going to replace people that don't. And you can already see that in some of the job markets now. People that can handle these, I don't want to just call them chatbots, they're much more than that. People that can script things for AI, they are going to surpass people that don't. And I know there's some people out there that say, well, I'm just not going to do this. Understand, the world is going to pass you by quickly. Also, according to Harvard Business Review, these reasoners, that's at level 2 that we were talking about, could replace 30% of current jobs. And we are right on the cusp of seeing that right now. And again, I say all the time, it's going to replace repetitive jobs. So what's a repetitive job? And I'm going to show you a couple of videos of that too. Even things like cab drivers. If you look in Japan right now, you will see they're beta testing cab drivers that are driverless. So literally you come up with your phone, you order a cab, you get in and it drives you where you want to go. There's not even a driver in it. So again, it's going to replace some of these repetitive jobs. I put this up here. I did this for bankers, just so you are aware. This is pretty recent, the market share, the leading vendors. So when you're talking about hardware, NVIDIA is obviously leading the way with that. And this is why I got into it. I wanted to put some stock into, I wanted to put money in several stocks. So I jumped into this for monetary reasons, and I got in on the hardware side. Companies start and they close, and they start and they close. So I jumped in on the hardware side. So I put money in NVIDIA, AMD, and a couple of others, also Taiwan Semiconductors. So anyway, if you wanted to see those, I thought that's pretty neat. And then as far as your models and platforms, again, we're talking about ChatGPT, or we're talking about another language model. Basically, OpenAI's got 39%. You've got Microsoft that controls 30%, AWS 8, 7, and this is a couple of months ago. And certainly this varies over from month to month. And then you have services on the end as well. So the next question is always, where is it going? And again, this is not according to me, this is according to science. We are going to see more self-driving vehicles, not just Teslas. There are 28 companies right now in the United States that are working on self-drive. And I put Wabi up there. That's one I follow, the lady that runs that company. She's got some really interesting ideas about this. We're going to see more autonomous vehicles. And again, start thinking about delivery services. You know, Amazon in certain places have delivery drones. You know, we're going to start seeing more of those. Again, that is a repetitive job. And I actually put a picture down here so you can see what one of those drones looks like. You're going to see extended cloud computing. That speaks for itself. You're going to see more BCIs. Those have just started. This is one of Elon Musk, one of his companies. And you can see Nolan Arbaugh. That is the first person who was a quadriplegic his entire life that had an implant. Well, what does AI have to do with that? It gets better by itself over time. They give a little bit of input here, a little bit of input there, and before it's over with, now he can control things using his mind. They're actually about to do their second implant as well. And I've heard they can do this for your animals too, if you're interested in doing that and want to know what your dog thinks or cat thinks. I don't. But anyway, that's something that they are doing. Enhanced 3D printing, and we're talking about operational efficiency with 3D printing. I'm not sure if you're aware, about 2 months ago, we sent up our first rocket that was completely 3D printed. So again, operational efficiency with that is going to be, we're going to see more of that. You're going to see more biometric technology. 72% of companies, and again, these are Dow and NASDAQ companies, are moving away from passwords. These things right here are going to go by the wayside. Why? Because of these. I can sit right next to you and I can grab your signal. I don't even have to be right on top of you. I can grab your signal. Any building that you can get into, I can now get into. So people are moving away from this type of technologies with passwords, and they're moving more toward the things that you see on your phone, facial recognition, retinal scans, and other things like that. So you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more virtual and augmented reality, and that's especially in education. We do a lot of that. We have iPads in our district, and we can actually watch a rocket take off, and kids can actually walk around it and see it from all directions. So we're going to see more of that. You're going to see more edge computing and cloud computing using 5G connectivity. You know, it's amazing. I can remember my dad sending me, I was mad at him. He sent me to Mississippi State to this class on coding, but how smart was he way back when? Back when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And I can remember that these computers that we have, that was just the conduit to get to the processing. Then we decided we wanted all the processing power back on the computers. And it seems like we're moving back in the opposite direction, where we have all of these AI systems out there, and now we're just using the computer to reach all of that processing power. So we're moving back that direction. You're going to see AI and cybersecurity. If you haven't watched this, go watch the Sean Ryan show with Ryan Montgomery. It will scare you to death. He is what they call the ethical hacker now. He is after child predators online, but he used to be a really bad guy. Now he's a really good guy, and he has a company called Pen Tester now that will work on your networks. If you're in your, basically they come in and test everything. If you've got any issues with your network, they will find it. The second thing that they will do is if they find any of your usernames or passwords, they will clean it from the dark web. So that's also something that's really good, and we're actually signing on with them in Pearl as well. But what we will see in cybersecurity is things have to happen fast. You know, there used to be a time where we said, you know, updates are going to go out on Saturday, right? Or Sunday night or something like that. We're not going to have time to do that anymore. This is moving so fast with coding with AI. Those updates are going to have to roll out, and they're going to have to roll out extremely fast. You're going to see more quantum computing expansion. You're going to see robotics. We've had robots for many years, but they couldn't talk to you. They couldn't reason. I'm going to show you a little bit of that in just a few minutes as well. And the big thing that I want to talk about is LLMs, which is large language models, are now going to turn into large action models. And I've got this little thing right here. This is called the Rabbit R1. This is really one of the first action models there's ever been. And a guy from Japan created this. So basically, if you were going to order a pizza, how would you have to do that? You'd have to pick up the phone and call. You'd have to get on an app. You'd have to do all of those things, right? With this, literally, all I have to do is say, I need 10 pizzas delivered to whatever address, and it's done for me. Or if you order an Uber, I can just say, I need an Uber out front to take me to this address at such and such a time, right? So that is taking language and turning it into action. And you're going to see a lot more of that. And again, I've got some videos I'm going to show you in just a minute. This is one, AI in healthcare. This is a big deal. We're not going to watch the whole video just for time purposes, but I think you'll get the gist of what's going on. This is actually being beta tested out west right now, but it's coming our way soon.
Hi, Sarah. I'm Rachel, your AI care manager. How are you doing after your appendectomy?
You know, I'm good. I'm glad to be home with my dog, Dennis.
It's great to hear that you're back home with Dennis. I noticed that Dr. Chang has prescribed you some antibiotics, specifically ciprofloxacin and metronidazole, due to your ruptured appendix. Were you able to get these medications?
I was. I did forget to mention to the doctor that I am allergic to penicillin. Is it still okay to take the medications?
Great.
We're going to stop there for time purposes. What do you think? Look, I can tell you I've done this a bunch of times, and about half the room goes, yeah, that's neat. The other half goes, I'm talking to a human. But understand that this is being run by AI, and look at the bottom. They created their own LLM language model for the focusing on detecting tone and also communicating empathy. You bumped into those doctors from time to time that don't have a lot of empathy, right? So the idea is this can be a bridge between the actual doctor and the patient for simple things. And again, I can remember a few years ago that I had a surgery and I was in a bind the next day. Like I'm going to go back to the hospital. I'm feeling so bad. So I called the doctor's office, and guess when I got a call back? The next day. You know, so this almost is like a triage nurse. And I think that's the way that they're wanting to treat this. If something is really going on, it detects your tone and can forward that information up to the doctor or the actual nurse that's there. So, and again, it's what people don't understand. It's already passed over 100 exams. Your doctor hasn't passed over 100 exams. So these things are highly intelligent. All of these models are. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. This is OpenAI's first robot, and I want you to pay attention when we start this. I want you to look at the date when this was given. Again, think language model turning into action model, right? So pay attention to the date here, 3/9 of 2024. Watch.
Hey, figure one, what do you see right now?
I see a red apple on a plate in the center of the table, a drying rack with cups and a plate, and you standing nearby with your hand on the table.
Great. Can I have something to eat?
Sure thing.
Great. Can you explain why you did what you just did while you pick up this trash?
On it. So I gave you the apple because it's the only edible item I could provide you with from the table.
Great. So based on the scene right now, where do you think the dishes in front of you go next?
The dishes on the table, like that plate and cup, are likely to go into the drying rack next.
Great. Can you put them there?
Again, we're going to stop just for time wise. What are your thoughts? Right? They're using language. And what did you see with the robot? You saw it reasoning. The first question that I asked was, how did it know what an apple was? So that I thought that was, I'm like, how did I understand the language portion of this, but how did it know? What's funny is we have been inadvertently training this thing for many years, and we've been training it with these. So why reinvent the wheel, right? So again, this is not why they were invented, but however, they used all of this data to put it in, so it actually has some visual representation of the words that it's using. What else did you notice about it? Anybody? Look, y'all know I'm an educator, right? I'm gonna ask questions. Anybody notice the language patterns? Did you hear it say things like, Did you hear it say things like, so? That's how we answer things from time to time. I'm going to tell you within the next few months, you're not going to know the difference between a human and a robot when they're talking to you. And they do this in every language. So again, this is something that's coming. So again, 3/9 of 2024. Look at the date on this one. This is figure 2. This is their second iteration of this robot, just released on 8/6 of 24. Think about what you just saw and think about what you're going to see now. This is a BMW plant in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Again, there's a little more to that. But in how long? We went from playing around with some dishes and an apple to we actually are beta testing these on an actual production line. And folks, these don't call in sick, right? We don't have to worry about safety issues. And here's the thing, we used to have to worry about programmers. Now, I don't know if you saw what it actually said. You don't need that programmer anymore. You just need somebody on the line that can walk up and using the English language, tell them what they need to do or do differently. And it will make that correction and that adjustment for you. So that is where the language models are coming into this. It is going to change the world as we know it. A few other things. This is, I'm not going to do that one. We're not going to mess with that. That's just going to take a little extra time. There are a couple of things. This is an interesting story too. I follow Mustafa Suleiman. He is the CEO of Inflection AI. And he says, I believe we're at an inflection point that's going to change humanity as we know it. AI will become a new digital species. And I tend to agree with him. And the question is why? They can communicate in all languages. Not only communicate in language, they can communicate with the little small things that make those languages what they are. Like most people think that Spanish is the same everywhere you go, and it's not. It will actually pick up the small things from all of these other countries that you typically don't hear. So they can see what we see. They can consume massive amounts of information. And I don't think we as humans can understand how massive, what that word actually means in the computing world now. They have a working memory. They have a personality. They have creativity. They can reason and they can formulate plans. And they can act autonomously if we allow it. And I think that's the conundrum we're going to run into very soon. So I was in Washington and I was giving this presentation and I had a middle-aged guy out there, white-headed, probably 350 people in the room, and he started jumping up and down. And I'm like, sure, what do you want to say? So I took the mic over to him. He said, you seen Jurassic Park? I said, I have. He said, you remember the quote? I'm like, that movie's 2 hours long. No, I don't remember the quote. Like, what quote are you talking about? And he said, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And I think that's where we're getting with AI in general. But also understand this, being in Washington, talking to them up there, several lobbyists, talking to some of the chiefs of staff, they're not looking at doing anything with this. Because the bottom line, if they regulate this for the United States, guess who's not regulating it? China, Japan, Russia. If we start regulating this, especially at the federal level, we're going to fall behind. So the bottom line is, again, they may regulate what you can do with it, but the technology is not going to get regulated. So I think we need to keep that in mind as we move forward as well. But I thought that was a great quote, and I tend to agree with that too. Just so you know, this is always a question, so I bring this up. What about data and security? In our world, that's extremely important. I can't let kids' social securities, names, numbers, I can't let those things get out, right? What people don't realize is that you can actually go to olama.com and you can download a language model to your computer and you can run it right there on your computer. It is, some people would think this is a 10 terabyte file. I mean, it's gigantic, right? No, 6 gigs. It'll take just a couple of minutes to download it. So believe it or not, you can download that and run a language. It's not pretty. It's not like looking at ChatGPT, but it will run on your computer. Also, just so you're aware, we are the first district that I'm aware of in the United States. We just opened up our own AI server in Pearl. So again, data security is important to us. So we want to do something that's offline. So basically, if you look at Meta, they spent $31 million training Llama 3, that language model. They give it away for free. Who wouldn't take $31 million? So we in Pearl decided we are going to. So now we can take all of the information that we want and do whatever we want to with it because it's not online. It's actually offline. And I can VPN. I'll show that to you tomorrow. I made sure it worked earlier. So I'll show you what that looks like. So again, my tech guy and I, we're going to jump out in front of this and do some things. So what does that do for us in the district? We could take the last 10 years of spending in the district and it can look for patterns that we don't see. You know, I could take all of my bus routing. I can put maps in it. I could take my bus routing and it can route for us. You know, I could take scheduling, which high school and junior high scheduling are really, really difficult to do. We could take schedules from the last 5 or 6 years, and we could take those, and it could give us a way to separate things out. But we'd have to have student names and teacher names to do that. So again, there's things that you can do online. There's things that you shouldn't do online. So we created our own server, just got that thing fired up this last week, and we found quickly that we need a lot more processing power. So when 2 people try to run it at one time, it bogs it down pretty good. So we're going to make some adjustments to that. So anyway, just so you know, you can download that and run it yourself. So how does this work? That's the question. It's pretty neat. I'm not going to go deep into this, but I want y'all to understand. I think it's important that you understand that everything we're talking about with these language models is based on probability. That's all it is. What is the most likely next word? That's all this is. Quite literally, when we start talking about encoding and tokens, basically every word in the English language is going to be given a token. And those strings of tokens go into the system and they predict the next word. But here's the difference. When you have billions and billions of inputs every single day, you get pretty doggone good at predicting what that next word is going to be. So as models get better, you have engineers on the back end that do some things with it as well, such as temperature and other things to where they can make it more concise or they can make it more creative. There's all of these things that they do on the back end, but also it's very much like Facebook. It's very much like Amazon. The more information that we pour into it, the better it gets. So that's far enough as far as that goes. Not really going to touch on that. Looking at time too. Where are we now? This is one of my favorite slides out of this entire thing. So, and again, they've given some IQ tests to these just to see how smart they are, and they did the best they could with it. Understand these can vary. But as a few months ago, ChatGPT 3.5 was 122 when it came out, and even a few months later, it hadn't fluctuated very much. ChatGPT 4, it started out at just above 130, and they retested this just a few weeks ago, and the IQ level is now 150, and it's been exposed to 630 billion words. So I tell people all the time, sit there and count to 1 billion and see how long that takes you. Now do that 630 times. ChatGPT 4.0 was just released. Claude 3 was at a 118 and Bard was at a 120. And again, I haven't seen anything recent on them. So what does this actually mean in real terms? This means that these programs are smarter than 95 to 98% of the people that you come into contact with every single day. You'd be crazy not to use that type of power in whatever job you're in. They are extremely smart. But again, you have to know how to get the best information out of it as well. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that as well. If you haven't seen ChatGPT 4.0, this is what you can do on your phone as well. I will pull this up just to let you hear it a little bit. Let me jump over to it. You go to the app, and if you hit the headphones, and it will connect. Assuming I have a good connection in here, it'll connect. Maybe not. I got to have a good internet connection. But basically, you can talk to it. And everything that you say on your phone will actually go right back into ChatGPT. So you get a full version of that, everything that was said and everything it said back to you. So literally, you can be walking down the hallway, ask it a question, go back and forth. I tell people all the time, I use ChatGPT. It is the perfect assistant and it is the perfect search engine. I no longer use Google for anything. Why would I do that when I can have one of these AI models go out and get things for me? Make sense? So anyway, that's a couple of things that were added with this as well. Again, all of this depends on your internet connection. So a 232 millisecond response time is extremely fast, but you've got to have a screaming connection to get that. You can create and edit photos. If you look, I took my photo and made myself a cartoon, and I really like it because it made me skinny. So the memory on this is so much better. And again, it's free for now. And remember when I talked about tokens a few minutes ago, you get 5 times more tokens if you're on the paid version of ChatGPT, which is $20 a month. And I can tell you this, I'd pay $200 a month to have it. It has changed my world and everything that I do. It saves me 30 to 40% of my time as superintendent. So, and it can do that in any job. It doesn't matter what that job is. And again, you're going to see some of this tomorrow. It's not really built for today. This is Sora. This is ChatGPT 5. We're going to watch just a second of this. I know we're running low on time, but I want y'all to see this before we take off. There's no audio on this. It's just video. So you start thinking about jobs that are going to go away. Quite literally, everything that you see here is somebody typing in a sentence or two. That's all. And look at the video that comes up. Now, you can obviously see that is computer generated. Watch your next video. A litter of golden retriever puppies playing in the snow. Does that look real? So you think about us or any business, you want to create your own commercial now. Do you need to go to a company to do that? And this is supposed to be released at the end of 24, probably maybe the beginning of 25. So again, all you have to do is type in a few words. You have to know how to give it the right commands in the English language, and this is what comes up on the back end. So this was their first iteration of that. So it's coming. A couple other things. I want to go through this really quickly. This is how to become an advanced user. If you want to take a picture of this slide, you're welcome to, you can have this whole slideshow. Like I said, I've given it to everybody on the planet pretty much. What most people do is they jump into these language models and they'll ask a question and it'll give them an answer, but you're not getting the best out of it. How do you get the best out of it? You got to give it a task. Everybody knows that. Whatever you want it to do for you, right? What they miss is giving it context. Give as much as you possibly can. Give it an exemplar. So in other words, in our world, if we had a writing rubric, we'd upload that writing rubric. That's an exemplar, or a perfect paper. Give it an exemplar. If you have a document that you use in your company, give it that document and let it say, hey, this is what we want to see on the end, and this is how we want you to do it. Give it a persona. Believe it or not, if you give it a persona, the answers are going to be so much better. If you say you are a 25-year Milken award-winning teacher, it's going to give you an answer that starts here instead of starting down here. So give it a persona, give it your format and conditions, and then give it a tone or emphasis. You can do all of those things. And the more of those you add, the better your responses are going to be. And here's a perfect example. I'm a 200-pound male looking to put on 10 pounds of muscle over the next 3 months. I just gave it some context, right? I only have time to go to the gym twice a week for an hour each session. More context. You're an award-winning fitness and nutrition expert. I just gave it a persona. Give me a 3-month training plan to follow that will accomplish my goals. Now I just gave it a task and put this plan into a chart for me. So now I've used 5 of these 6. It's going to be so much better with responding to you based on that. And again, when I get to my computer, I'm going to show you this tomorrow. This is part 2, where you customize it for yourself. Tell it a little bit about your background and tell it how you want it to respond to you. And I'll show you those tomorrow when I can get access to my computer where you guys can see it as well. But it will take those 2 algorithms, and every response it gives, it's going to run through those 2. So again, these are just ways to become a really, really good user on this. So for you guys, this is my last slide, and I'm going to shut up and let y'all ask any questions that you want for today. I did this for legislators as well. What are some things it can do for you? And I can tell you, I've created a GPT just for you guys that will actually take any bill that you want. You can upload that into ChatGPT. It will give you a summary of that bill. It will give you the pros and cons of that bill. And if you tell it where you live and where your voting area is, it will actually go out to the internet and do market research for you, and then bring back what your area will think about this particular bill. Would that save some time? So I've got that, and I can actually take that and I can email that to any of you that want it. So the point being is you can build all of these things. This is why I choose ChatGPT, because it's very customizable. So you can draft bills with it. You can summarize legislation. You can do impact analysis, response to inquiries, town hall prep, policy research. This is a good one, comparative analysis state to state, speech drafting, talking points. We don't ever have those up here, do we? Right? So it'll create those for you. The stakeholder analysis, press releases, anything that you want it to do, it will do. You just have to understand how to communicate with it. And that's what I will discuss a little bit with you guys tomorrow. So I think I am close to time. I wanted to give you about 5 minutes. If you had any questions that you wanted to ask me, y'all are welcome to.
Thank you. Did you breathe?
No, not a lot. I told you I had to go fast.
Yeah,
This
Mr. Gary,
this typically is an hour and a half to 2 hours. So, 40 minutes, I got to move quickly.
Well, I appreciate it, and I kind of rushed us into it. At the door, I believe we've got an agenda of everything that's going on the next 2 days. And Mr. Chisholm is, we're getting a twofer out of him. He's going to come back in the morning and go through the rest of the presentation. As I said, a lot of us visited with him a few weeks ago. First off, yeah, I think everybody on this side wants a copy of that, so we can definitely use it. I've got a question or two real quick. Early in the presentation, you said something, there's a fact about a 30% displacement of the workforce. Is there any data that speaks to what additional workforce will create?
No, not really. There are some discussions. Again, if we start talking about cab drivers and we start talking about maybe East Coast to West Coast trucking, if they eventually replace that with AI-driven machines, it's going to create some other jobs as well. You got to keep those trucks running. You've got to we don't know what that market's going to look like. So again, I think it's incumbent upon us in the education world to make sure that kids understand this, understand what it is, and then be able to take that to whatever market they want.
I agree. And some of the data I've read, so there may be as many 90 million people displaced, but we may create 130 million jobs. The way I look at it in my mind, we don't have nearly as many blacksmiths as we did 120 years ago, but we do have a whole lot of mechanics. So we just as
Yes, sir.
we age out, that will happen.
I am a huge proponent of CTE classes. In fact, my son
Absolutely.
has just finished up his, he is now a certified welder, and he's actually working with an electrician company right now. So those jobs aren't going to go away. Like
No.
a robot can't do that. Okay, and I can promise you a robot is not going to do your HVAC in the middle of July in Mississippi either. So those jobs aren't going anywhere.
This is correct. Any questions from the committees?
You said we're at the 4th generation right now for AI.
Yes, sir.
Can you kind of explain, and you said we're almost at the 5th. Can you kind of explain again what the 5th is?
Absolutely. We can go back to that slide as well if I can run back real quick. And again, I told you we were right on the precipice of being on the next one, which is artificial general intelligence. I miss it. No, it's before that. So where we are is right here. This is reasoning. And again, you're going to see a little bit of that. But the next step is it can do anything a human can do. And that's what I was showing you with the robot. It can actually understand what's going on. It can learn and it can apply it. So again, when you have a robot standing at a line at Toyota or BMW or Nissan, now that is the next generation to where it can actually think for itself. And again, all of this is based on probability. I know that sounds strange, but that's all it is. It understands language and it can reason. So we are right on the precipice of doing that almost. And you're talking about in like 16 months. It's not like these language models aren't new. They're just new to the public as of November of 22. So again, we are right on the next step of it doing things that humans can do, including reasoning, thinking, and acting on that reasoning. That make sense? You're welcome.
Any other questions? As I said, Mr. Chisholm will be here tomorrow morning, so if you kind of absorb some of this tonight, we can come back with some questions. Thank you for that very involved presentation and the timing. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry it had to go fast, but it's the way it is.
That's great. That's
Thank
great.
you.
We're trying to pack a lot in here. We're going to move right into our next set of speakers, if you don't mind. Ms. Lauren Pavales. I got it close. From Deloitte is here, and also Gabe Grab is going to be there, so they're going to speak on the next section. Again, as I said, they're from Deloitte, and welcome. We're glad to have you.
Okay, wow, that was a lot to come up to after. Thank you very much. That was great. But actually, it was a really good segue. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lauren Pawales, my colleague Gabe Grab. Thanks for taking some time with us today. I'm from Deloitte. I'm the overall Mississippi account leader here for Deloitte. We're really excited to be here. Thanks very much for the opportunity. And yes, AI is all over the place. The way that we look at this, there are lovely pictures. Today, we're going to talk to you about understanding artificial intelligence. It'll be a slightly different construct to what you might have just heard, but it'll build upon some of the principles. So that'll be good for you to kind of continue the learning, although I'm sure a lot of you have heard and read a lot about this already. We're going to do a bit of the overview of the spectrum because AI ranges a whole bunch of different things. We're going to show you some use cases and the benefits of it. A lot of folks come at it with it being scary. We look at it as a really opportunistic, optimistic kind of a future. So we're going to talk about that. But the real thing is being ready, right? Because it's here, it's happening. There's no turning back. We're going to talk about what those themes are and to be ready. So for folks like yourselves in your positions in the legislature, what that might look like, and trustworthy AI. So let's be realistic. We don't want this out there without sort of having some structures to prevent some potentially bad things happening if we aren't sort of on the front end of that. And then we're going to look at some emerging AI policies and key considerations because we are working across the nation. And I'll focus you here. We're lucky enough to be dealing with 48 out of 50 states. We're in local municipalities and in higher ed institutions as well and across the federal government. So we are definitely seeing and hearing and understanding what all of these kinds of things are. We deal with lots of partners. So we are here to help with services, whether it's AWS. I think we have our friends here. Hello, hello. We love AWS. We also care for Google and IBM and Oracle and Microsoft. And we care about all of them, but we really like AWS. I'm just kidding. He's saying that. It's really important for us to be partnering with everybody because AI is everywhere and we are here to help you with the services. We are very much important, what we care a lot about is what's happening in the community. So particularly with AI, we spend lots of time paying attention to what's happening with the citizens of the state and how AI can benefit, and how states, legislatures and such can have structures to, have outreach. So I'm going to turn this over to Gabe, who's going to get you into the rest of the story, and I'll be back up in a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Thanks everyone for the opportunity. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Gabe Grab. I lead our AI practice for state government. So I really focus in on helping to actually implement AI and data analytics solutions that really drive opportunities for our various different government stakeholders, whether that's helping to drive, workforce efficiencies, helping to really streamline day-to-day tasks, or really using AI to even start to interact with some of the citizens or some of the residents that the individual states serve. So as a kind of fun starting point, the stat that many folks have heard is that 90% of people interact with AI almost on a minute-to-minute basis, but less than 10% of people actually realize that they're using an AI solution. So when I think about my day yesterday, as I woke up and I traveled here from Pennsylvania, I asked Siri, and Siri used a voice-to-text algorithmic solution to actually understand what the weather was going to be like. So obviously it's cloudy. We're getting ready for a potential storm. I ordered an Uber that predicted my fare to the airport. It automatically forecasted that fare. It automatically told me the cost. It told me the duration and the timing. It's using a machine learning model behind the scenes to be able to calculate all of those things. On my flight, I listened to a personalized playlist. So I'm a big Crime Junkies fan. It sent me a Crime Junkies podcast, which I listened to on my flight. By no means did I have to search for that. It's just targeted based on my individual historical searches. One of the things that we're starting to do is use AI from a day-to-day perspective within our everyday lives from a work and really a professional standpoint. So we have something called Documentation Engine, where we're actually scanning legacy mainframe solutions and actually generating deliverables. So on my flight here, I reviewed a deliverable that wasn't created by an analyst on our team. It was actually created by a generative AI solution. And it was able to save literally countless numbers of hours by accessing the code, scanning the code, and providing both a functional documentation as well as a technical design of how that solution works. And then last but not least, just as a fun example, my wife and I are both traveling this week, and my parents are watching the kids. So we realized that we didn't have many groceries at the house. My parents called me. So I went out to Walmart.com and I ordered some groceries. So if it's okay, we're going to launch a quick video of one of the solutions that we've built recently.
There's a lot of buzz out there about the future of generative AI, especially when it comes to helping customers find the products they want fast the first time they look for them. The solution to these problems isn't far away. This proof of concept using generative AI technology shows how retail brands can better engage with customers across a variety of scenarios, saving them time and money so they can focus on things that matter most to them. Let's help David, a single father of two who promised to host dinner with his kids and parents next weekend. There's one problem. He's not exactly an expert chef. Normally, he'd spend a lot of time planning dinner, searching for recipes, making lists, and going to the store. Not anymore. This solution can recommend a recipe and show him all the products he needs in one contextual search instead of by individual product. He doesn't leave the site when he has a question. Accommodating his daughter's allergies and swapping ingredients is easy with the chat-like responses. Questions aren't limited to text from the product description. Translations and more are right at David's fingertips without abandoning his cart. Questions answered. He's about to add everything. And, oof, it's a little out of budget. But David can save lasagna night. He can ask to keep things under $35. Done. The system intelligently optimizes the products with alternatives and modifies the recipe to match. Just because it's lasagna on a budget doesn't mean it has to look that way. If David's looking to impress mom and dad, he can get recommended presentation tips with AI-generated images. David might just be inspired to further up his dinner party game with a wine pairing or gelato for dessert. Sometimes customers have an idea of what they want, but need help narrowing down their options.
So we'll pause it there and maybe jump back to the presentation. But the reason we showed you this one is because whether it's a retail organization, a government organization, a manufacturing company, what our clients, what the organizations we're working with are really trying to use AI to provide that personalized experience. So if you think about personalization from the ability to, individually figure out and search for a product, to be able to tailor your ingredients to a specific food allergy, to be able to search for a specific budget, to be able to pair with other foods. The ability to use AI to quickly do that is really where we see the market going and where our clients are most interested in really building that personalized experience. So when we think about AI at Deloitte, we look at AI as a series of different capabilities. There's a broad spectrum, and I know Chris mentioned some of these in his presentation as well. But the spectrum to us really starts with, I would say, kind of some standardized tools that have been around for quite some time related to robotics and process automation, which is the RPA component that's here. And what RPA really enables you to do is really streamline commoditized or mundane tasks, things like data entry, as an example, that allow you to take data and quickly input it into an application without forcing to have a data entry clerk or a person to do that individual work. As you move up the spectrum, you start to see other capabilities, things like optical character recognition. So for anyone who has driven on a toll road and they've had a picture of their license plate taken and then they've received a mail or a bill in the mail, that's using an OCR technology to actually scan that image, scan your license, and actually send that information out to you. As you move further up the spectrum, you start to get into some of your kind of more advanced ML capabilities. Some of the vision AI services, these are the things that you saw in the first presentation that the robot was using to actually determine that it was an apple on the page. We're seeing vision AI quite a bit in our transportation infrastructure practice. When you think about being able to use drones to actually scan aging infrastructure, bridges, highways, roadways, that in the past, you had to send a safety inspector out. You oftentimes had to use a helicopter. It was time consuming, it was costly. Now with drone technology, we're able to equip them with some vision AI solutions to actually scan the image and scan the area. And as you move further up the spectrum, you get into what everyone is talking about lately, which is generative AI. So generative AI, really the kind of key underlying thing that makes it different from the other solutions is it leverages what they call a large language model. A large language model is trained on oftentimes petabytes and petabytes worth of the world's data. What we are building generative AI solutions are really what we would consider private Gen AI solutions. So if you go out to ChatGPT or if you go out to Gemini and use the default public solutions that are available, the prompts that you provide, the data inputs that you provide, the individual data that you provide is being shared to continue to train those models. Where we really spend a lot of time with our clients is figuring out how to privatize these solutions. So how do we put specific guardrails in place? How do we put specific security standards in place? How do we lock them down so we train them on a specific knowledge repository that doesn't go out to the full public for consumption, that really can be controlled within that individual government organization? So some of the other kind of big use cases we're seeing use cases, especially in a government setting, evolve across these 5 core areas. Everything from document creation, which can focus on things like creating job postings, creating correspondence, generating invoices on an automated basis, data entry, and the list goes on, to knowledge management. One of the things that we're actively working with several of our clients right now is how can we rebuild a lot of their business intelligence and reporting solutions so that you don't have to go write a query to get an answer. You can ask natural language question and it can go and query your data set and send you back results. A lot of back office functions, these are technology solutions oftentimes that we're building to more quickly and efficiently create code to implement software, more quickly and efficiently run test scenarios to generate deliverables. We have one state currently where we're actually building a human resources agent, and that agent actually allows you to look at your current benefit plan, your current insurance plan, and compare it to other plans that are available within their organization so they can do that side-by-side comparison. And then last but certainly not least is the customer component that we're seeing emerge. So these are everything from how do we retool our legacy call center solutions to build a more connected customer. How do we more intelligently interact with the citizens or customers that we serve? How do we build some generative chat solutions So these are kind of the big, I'd say 5 or 6 areas where we're seeing a lot of traction and a lot of emergence from our clients. So some of the themes and just across the bottom border, so Deloitte actually has a dedicated AI institute, and that AI institute actually does a quarterly survey. So we go out and we survey 2,000 executives across 6 different industries, as well as 2,000 employees. And really the only caveat is you have to have implemented a large scale AI solution at your organization. So we're looking for folks that have familiarity implementing these solutions and using these tools. So 2,700 plus results, six industries. Some of the big things that we're seeing, right? Some of the things that we're hearing again and again. There's a lot of pressures on legislators, on leaders to really figure out how do we establish protocols? How do we build safe and trustworthy AI? How do we build governance models into place that actually secure this data? We hear that organizations are starting to limit use cases. We know internally ourselves, we are limiting certain AI use cases because of uncertainty from a regulatory standpoint, because of uncertainty from a risk standpoint. And it was one of the big themes that actually came out of the most recent survey we did. AI is being implemented across technology platforms. You're going to hear from a number of other technology vendors today and tomorrow. That's the trend that we're seeing. It's not a single technology platform. When we work with many of our states, they are trying to figure out what are approved technologies for our individual states, who are the right vendors, and what is really the right solution based on the model that they're providing. So we are going to continue, I think, to see really this hybrid kind of cross-technology play for a lot of these AI solutions. And then where organizations, at least initially, are kind of making the biggest strides is really around improved efficiency and productivity. And this is primarily still from a workforce standpoint. So things like software development, research and development, and a number of other kind of product-focused services is where we're seeing kind of some of the early wins from an AI perspective. So a few of the kind of fun stats coming out of the survey. Do organizations think they're prepared for AI? From our survey results, less than 50% feel they're highly prepared. And we'll share the survey with you so you can take a look at it. But there was very few that said, yes, we feel that we're highly prepared. The biggest gaps, and I think this is the interesting piece, and it's a little deceiving, the circles that are larger are the ones where they actually felt more equipped and more prepared. So many of our clients feel that they are starting to put the right technology infrastructure in place, that they've come up with a better data management plan to manage data quality. Where they see the biggest gaps is from a talent perspective. They also see the biggest gaps from a risk and governance standpoint. So I know the question was asked earlier around, what job opportunities are we anticipating? What are we seeing from a talent perspective? Of the folks that we interviewed in here, it was about 80% of the executives and CEOs that we interviewed have hired individuals focused on AI. So they've created new AI positions, they've created new AI jobs in their organizations. Only about 10% have laid individuals off as a result of AI. So we are looking at it as a 2x, 3x multiplier in terms of driving opportunity, but certainly the jobs will shift and some jobs may change or go away. So what are we doing? How are we making organizations ready? How are we getting ready? I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but we use this as kind of a framework for getting started, which we call our Ready AI framework. So step number 1 is really set the direction. So what is the strategic direction that you're looking to set in your organization? So what is the use case? What is the business value behind that use case? What is the risk profile of implementing that solution? What is your governance model? Do you have a governance model in place? If not, you need one as a starting point before you actually get started with implementing these solutions. As you move kind of into the build phase, it's really about the people, data, and technology. I've said a few times, data really does drive success. So if you want quality AI outputs, you really need to have quality data up front. So making sure your organizations have a data quality plan in place, that we have data quality requirements from a legislative standpoint before we are going out and putting AI solutions on top of bad data is really critical to kind of the overall success. And the last piece, and I think the piece that actually gets forgotten pretty often, is how are you going to manage this holistically from an ongoing standpoint? So one of the things that tends to happen is these models and AI solutions start to drift. Sometimes you'll hear the term hallucinate. So as they receive more inputs, they need to continue to be tuned. They need to continue to be trained. They need to continue to be monitored. So making sure that you have that holistic management in place is critical to really the long-term success. On the left-hand side is something we try to do in all of our solutions, but it's really putting that customer-centric view. How would the customer interact with this? How would the customer drive AI with this? The right-hand side is really the trust component. So how do we build these models in a more trustworthy fashion? So if you look at most organizations, what they're actively working to do is build AI solutions that really drive trust. So I won't go through all of these things, but oftentimes where we start is with a risk analysis. Then we have a transparency model that actually looks at the underlying variables, the underlying factors that are determining the output of your AI solution. And you're really trying to build that knowledge. You're trying to build that understanding from a trustworthy standpoint. I briefly hit on a little bit of policy. 78% of organizations surveyed by our AI Institute think more regulation is needed, which was surprising to me, but it's one of the top things that we're seeing. Across all the policies and the bills that we've been tracking, of the more than 400 that have come out this year, many are focused on deepfakes. A lot of states are getting started with AI working groups, with AI committees. These are some of the specific ones that have set them up and that we're actively working with. Some sample state actions, things that I think are a little bit unique to individual states. If you think about New Jersey, New Jersey has done a good job setting up public-private partnerships. They're actively working with Princeton University. They've set up what they call an AI hub. Governor Murphy recently signed into law a tax incentive program that actually gives $500 million in tax incentives for individuals to create AI jobs in New Jersey. So they've been really focused from an economic development standpoint. Pennsylvania, they've really been focused from a tooling perspective. They have an exclusive agreement signed with Microsoft, OpenAI, and ChatGPT that it's a closed environment for the state of Pennsylvania. So they rolled out a pilot to more than 150 users to start using ChatGPT on a day-to-day basis. Colorado, first one to sign legislation in the law. Still a lot to be worked out on how that law will work, but it does give the Attorney General some enforcement action. It also starts to establish an AI officer and starts to establish high-risk use cases. I would say on that one, there's still much, much, much more to come in terms of how it will work. And then finally, I'll hit on Virginia. Virginia has done a great job laying out an AI roadmap, which basically, if you think about the maturity curve I went through earlier, all the different solutions and capabilities that are out there, they've done a great job actually working through what vendors are approved, what software is approved, so that they can start to really use solutions and utilize it from a vendor standpoint. So we're going to close with this before we take some questions. So down the left-hand side are some of the key kind of lessons learned that we found while implementing AI solutions. One of the big things is that, drive and really deliver AI value, drive for the business. The data we've hit on a few times really drives success. Building a governance model that aligns and really has some overarching rules and a security framework. Starting small before you actually start implementing broadband or broad scale. And then the last thing is really kind of keeping humans in the loop. So making sure that we have humans involved as they're really using AI to augment decision process, but not replacing a human. So that's been something that's been core to really kind of our government setting. With that, I'll turn it back over to Lauren to hit on a few of the kind of legislative things that we are seeing across the various different states.
Right, and just sort of building on that, right? So for those of you who are sitting in the room, legislators, right? And so, I mean, you guys have been talking about this. You're obviously hosting a lot of conversations to think about this, but what's your role in all of this is probably one of the major questions. Governance is a big topic that we've encouraged the legislative branch and all the states to pay attention to, right? Obviously, what's that continuum? How prescriptive do you want to be? Do you want to set the stage? But governance is really, really important. So the question you want to ask yourself is, do you want something at the center that sets up a governance structure? Loosely, maybe, could be strict depending on sort of your interpretation, but something that sets the stage. So the state of Tennessee has been doing that as an example. We've got other examples, but something to think about that as legislators, probably what your main role will be. And making sure that there is some kind of risk framework You don't have to necessarily get into the detail, but that you say, the state of Mississippi wants some kind of framework to make sure that there's some accountability there. On economic growth and innovation, the question is, how do you want to legislate incentivizing AI, period, in the state of Mississippi? It's a worthy conversation to have. It's what we're seeing in other legislative bodies to discuss. Encouraging it, it's here. So to try and maybe ignore it is maybe not the best idea, although you can. The idea is, what do you want to do with it to make it most advantageous for the state? So, incentivizing investment for job opportunities, economic development, and doing it in a way that is most advantageous to the state is something that we've seen and something to consider. Funding allocation and budget. So, we're not sure yet what the feds are going to do. You can see that, and you heard that, for national security purposes, it may not be as restrictive maybe as one would think. It could be, we're not sure. The idea is, what are those opportunities to actually get funding from the feds if that is something that is of interest? Because it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort to refine your data, to get your infrastructure up and running, to require folks to do the things that make sense. And it's maybe to retool, in some cases, your workforce. It's not a cheap endeavor, and it's something that might be a partnership activity that you want to think about. What kinds of grants, what kind of partnership with private industry do you want to do there? Because all of those things take time, money, effort, and it's tough as the legislator. I don't know that the state can do it all on its own. We are not seeing that that's possible, and we have a lot of private industry that actually wants to really be involved. So something to think about there. And then finally, we've been talking about talent and workforce. What and how do you want legislation to be a part of establishing what the state's workforce should be doing in the world of AI? Should there be training? Should there be something that everybody who gets on board has to know about? There's just something to think about in an introductory manner all the way up to advanced, so that there's discussions. What parts of the workforce would you actually want to consider, being sort of retrained for something else? And then the other thing to have the conversation is, which industries do you actually think is going to be impacted? I mean, at the end of the day, it's not to replace, it's maybe to provide extra time for other state workers to do other things, but better to be on the side of thinking about how to be proactive than having it done to you. So, looking at that and thinking about how to source that. So just some things for you all to consider as you're going into next legislative session. This won't be one and done. It's going to take a while, but it's something to start with. Okay. Q&A.
Wow, a lot of information. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Thank you, Lauren and Gabe, for your presentation. I have a question. Wondering if you have any concerns around bias within AI, particularly racial and gender bias, because as you talked about, the data is only as good as it's being put in and has been refined. And if any of those concerns have been addressed through model legislation that we could also consider.
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to repeat it, is concern over bias. So we are absolutely concerned. All data has some level of bias. So anyone that says their data is not biased really probably does not know what they're talking about. But really, it's the threshold of bias that you allow within your data set. So where does that actually start? It starts with, what is the impact and what is the use case that you're looking to achieve? Something that has biased data that reorders supplies for your office does not have as large an impact as someone that determines, what is the likelihood that they should be eligible for food stamps, right? The huge difference in terms of what is the ongoing impact. So what we do to control for bias, and we didn't hit on it too much, but in our trust framework, we do something that's called subgroup analysis. So we can actually control for individual groups of data. So we can, as a real example, we built a predictive modeling solution that predicted the likelihood that someone would pay their child support obligation. And it scored individuals on a 1 through 4 scale, 1 being very likely to pay, 4 being unlikely to pay. To make sure that we weren't introducing bias into the results, we looked at data from a socioeconomic standpoint. We looked at data from a race and ethnicity standpoint. We did a subgroup analysis from an age standpoint, from a gender standpoint, and the list went on and on. And one of the real things that we found is that what our model initially was biased towards was if someone didn't have a bank account. So if you didn't have a bank account, you were being scored poorly and you were unlikely to pay your child support. But when we took a step back and flagged that, it had almost no impact and almost no bearing on the likelihood for someone to pay. So yeah, so the short answer is absolutely, we take it pretty seriously. And what we try and do is kind of this subgroup analysis to make sure we control for individual groups and individual biases as we do data testing.
That's a very interesting example because I think about it a little further. Well, what are the barriers to these subgroups getting access to a bank account? You know, which is another layer, another level, which is why I liked the bullet that you had about making sure that humans are still involved because, you know, there's a lot more to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we work in mostly a government setting where we're giving these tools and these solutions to caseworkers, right? So they're going out and oftentimes in a human services setting, interacting with some of the most vulnerable people that are out there, right? Children that may have been abused, people that, you know, may need intellectual disability services. So we are not looking by any means to replace the human at least from a human services standpoint. It's really just to kind of augment their decision making. Maybe we can give them a little more information on the history of that caseworker interaction with that family. Or maybe we can give a little more information on the targeted intervention services that may be right for them. So that's generally what we try and do, is really augment the human.
Yeah, and the only one thing I would just add to this is what this just shows is it's that much more important that the leaders in the state who actually are, what that just shows is the leaders that are in the state are that much more important who own the data and the responsibility that they know what the data is, because we're not going to be the ones to ever tell you that this is more important than not. What we would do is set up analysis and analytics to show you the differences, but it's really be incumbent upon the state leadership to decide based on at the very beginning, what's the end goal here that you're looking to accomplish? What are the strategic importance? So that's really what this is. This has shined even more of a brighter light on if data is bad, decisions are going to be made maybe in a more poor setting. But it's about accountability for people who own the data. So I just want to make sure that we highlight that.
Thank you so much. We are very fortunate to have outstanding institutions across the state that have research departments, and that may be an opportunity for us to make sure that the data that is provided as we move forward is as accurate as possible. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. And I think that what was just discussed may have been on what my question was, because you'd mentioned data quality in legislation. And is that what you're referring to when you mentioned that earlier?
Yeah, I think what we're referring to, and you know, this is just guidance, but from a legislative standpoint, what's helpful is that where organizations define, here is the data quality requirements, here's the data quality plan, and there's some pretty broad guidance that's actually out there nationally that you could kind of pull from to say, this is at a bare minimum what we are looking to do to make sure our data is of high quality, right? And there's some very simple tests and very simple early steps. So I think having a legislature or having a government organization outline some of those initial kind of upfront data quality requirements is something that we would encourage from a guidance standpoint.
And where could we find, you said there's guidance out there that we could look at, where would we find that?
So we could share a few. So we have a whole data quality framework and a data quality approach that we do within our organization. We can share a few of our competitors as well, but there's I mean, honestly, if you go out and you Google data quality frameworks or you Google the NIST security framework, it'll actually have some of that information available for you as well. But we'll take it as a to-do to share some of our data quality standards.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. So I'm seeing that 78% of the organizations surveyed said that government regulation of AI is needed. So my question to you is, how do we make sure that we're not, number one, over-regulating, and number two, under-regulating?
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit of a loaded question. I'll try and answer to the best of my ability. So, from a vendor perspective, from Deloitte's perspective, what we have found helpful is clear and concise legislation. So things that are not broad and overreaching. Not to pick on an individual state, but right now, some of the flack that Colorado is getting is they are so broad in regulating high risk use cases that folks don't really understand what the high risk use cases are. So for us, what we would recommend and what we would find helpful, one is a clear person or an individual that we go to for AI approvals. So who is the chief AI officer within your state, within your organization that can give direction on how AI, on really approving AI use cases. Two, we've seen some states outline a governance model. Here is how you get an AI solution approved. Here's the tool sets that are available. Here's the data quality standards that you must follow. And then three, I would say, is really a risk framework. So a lot of states have started to roll out sample risk frameworks that organizations are required to comply with if they're going to deliver AI within that state. So I think as much, clarity and conciseness and always having that single point of contact to go to would be extremely helpful from a vendor perspective.
Okay, and one more question. As you know, Mississippi is pretty much moving from an agricultural state to a manufacturing state. Now, we saw the robots that were working at the plant, putting cars together. What my concern is, how do we make sure that we have job security for our people that are working in manufacturing industry?
It's probably a little bit outside of my purview, to be honest. I don't want to give you the wrong answer, but what we've seen in some of our settings is we've actually seen many organizations focus on a reskilling as opposed to bringing in new and replacing. And what we've seen, and this is oftentimes more from a government setting, which I mostly work with, is that it's actually allowed your employees to go and really focus on more complex, higher priority, individualized services and activities. So I think you could probably extrapolate that to other industries as well. So it's how do you reskill and retool workers so that they are leveraging AI solutions to really kind of move forward into the jobs of tomorrow, as opposed to trying to replace them entirely with AI tools. That I know it's a little bit of a high level response.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add is what we're seeing also is the technical colleges across the different states have had a huge upswing with AI, because to that point, a lot of folks who might be in an industry that may be affected by AI improvements doesn't mean that they're going to lose their jobs, but they want to learn another trade, or they want to upskill something, or a 4-year degree or something. And so we're seeing the educational higher ed space and the technical college space increase. So I don't know. I think also the other thing I would just tell you is what we're seeing is everybody is getting smarter about the people that they have and what they're actually providing. And that makes it a lot easier to have larger scale business discussions. Sometimes there's been a long period of time where things have just been going along without sort of paying attention to the business operations. And so this has brought some clarity so that people know what they've got.
Thank you all so much.
I believe Senator Delano, who is online, has a question. Can we get him?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, thank you both for having this forum. I wish I could be there with you today. I had a couple of questions real quick. Since Deloitte works in multiple states, can you give me some sense of what your primary role is at the state level? Are you working as a consultant, an implementer, an aggregator? What's your primary role?
Yeah, yes, Senator. We're primarily a consultant. As we work with these different organizations, we oftentimes help them to do what we call systems integration work. So it's really the establishment of these AI solutions, doing some competitive analysis for them to figure out what is the right technology stack, helping bring in subject matter expertise that are really focused on a specific business area, and then really doing the end-to-end implementation for them, which includes everything from creating the initial AI solution to doing the initial training to doing testing, and then roll out with our individual state stakeholders. So
Okay.
we're that systems integrator.
In your experience, are you seeing that a lot of states are using the legislative branch and regulations through the legislative branch to do a lot of the implementing, and then they use just the legislative statutes for the framework that's required to, or that you had in one of your earlier slides? Is that kind of what you're seeing it through a lot of states, given the executive branch the flexibility to respond and to move at a quicker time pace than the legislature does?
Yes, that's correct. We've seen both a surge of new legislative bills coming out this year. I think one of the slides said 400 plus. So we are seeing some direction coming out from individual state legislators. We're also seeing quite a few executive orders come out from various different governors across the nation. And typically, they're guiding really what is the policy, what is the overforcing action, and then individual agencies and programs are the ones that are really kind of taking their IT standards, their AI standards, and using them and following them to actually do solutions implementation.
And is that framework specific to, are you seeing that limited to just state government, or is the framework pushed down to guidance for municipalities and local governments as well?
There's some variance. I would say the framework starts at the federal government. I haven't seen states broadly adopt what the federal government is doing from an executive order standpoint or from an OMB standpoint, but they do have it from an AI Bill of Rights. They do have some guidance that's out there from the feds. Many states are creating their own guidance. Some states are pushing that down into local municipalities. However, many of the local government, local organizations that I work with are creating their own. So I was with the town of Gilbert yesterday talking to them in Arizona, and they're actually creating their own AI guidance and AI governance. We've seen similar activities happen in Denver. So even though there's a state law and comprehensive state governance, they're actually still creating their own at the local level. So I would say the majority of the localities that I work with are creating their own guidance. It's not coming from the state.
Okay, and then lastly, this is on the subject of procurement. We're always wanting to leverage state dollars and leverage it in any way that we can. And of course, that would be helpful in many cases for local jurisdictions. Specifically with AI, I don't know if I need an explanation right now or time will permit that, but I would really like to see how states have addressed procurement for AI, and whether it is something that is either a self-hosted model or it's a combination of self-hosted SaaS or how that's done, and how can we be more efficient with the procurement of this so that we can implement it in a more expeditious time frame.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think it's something, and I think it was one of our kind of last points in terms of funding and procurement. It does seem like there's a lot of variance, and I think it would be great for Mississippi to kind of help to streamline that process for within your state. We are still seeing a lot of states go out to the traditional RFP, RFQ process and put out large scale procurements to actually go and procure AI services. We are seeing some states. A good example is Utah. They've stood up an AI pilot program where they actually have streamlined the ability to do small scale AI pilots underneath a certain dollar amount. And the benefit of doing something like that is it's much quicker to get something approved than going through an end-to-end procurement. Those are two that kind of come to mind as the big ones. Lorna.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Senator, to consider is terms and conditions on how you will allow your partners to help you in the state. Because to Gabe's earlier point, you can have setting up pilot environments and getting contracts faster, but right now still statutorily in the state of Mississippi, terms and conditions are tough, right? So you want to have providers, vendors, such as pick whoever, to include us, to be able to come in quickly and work with AWS and Google and Microsoft and such. And terms and conditions are difficult here. So this is the time to consider in a legislative fashion, maybe around AI is a good time to maybe pilot it somehow through an authority or through some kind of statute changes in your terms and conditions to improve that, because the relationship with the folks on the outside is tough when you can't get through that kind of thing. So if you have the overlaying of the same terms and conditions you have on everything else, it's going to slow you down.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I've got one question. One of your slides says 36% indicated that worries about regulatory compliance have been a major barrier in deployment. I think you kind of hit on that on a high level. Are there specific items that you can speak to that maybe that are concerns?
Look at the stat row.
Sorry, there it is. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So where a lot of that is coming, so there's a few use cases that even ourselves as a provider of AI solutions have intentionally stayed away from. One of them has been from a policing and criminal justice standpoint. So being able to use these different vision AI solutions to actually identify individuals and crowds or bad actors, we've been very clear that we're staying away from that kind of solution, and we're staying away from that at a broad scale. A portion of that is not just regulation; it's just kind of our own kind of feelings and drive towards it. But there are certain solutions when you think about from a social media standpoint, when you think about from a data curation standpoint, when you think about integrating third-party data that you may not own. There's a whole copyright component that comes into play. So if I'm taking data that I do not own and then I'm using an AI solution to produce something else, another set of data, and then I'm rolling that out as a product or as an asset, am I now the owner of that IP? So there's been some hesitancy to invest in some of these large-scale AI products or assets because of concerns that we may not actually own the IP. And then there's a few areas that we'll just stay away from just because of concern from an enforcement standpoint. So I think that's kind of where you're getting this 36%. I think also there's a few specific state examples where you see folks that are exiting. California is a good example to look from. California has introduced a few new bills recently that require certain AI disclosures, that require potential AI enforcement from a fee perspective, that require some pretty comprehensive work in order to even provide an AI solution upfront. So some of those are just barriers to cost type of things. So we can dig a little more into that, but I'd say those are some of the big ones that we're seeing.
That gives us, as we've researched for these hearings, one of the things that's kind of come to the surface is I think we all know at some point we'll legislate, whether it's the next session or not. Don't know the answer to that. But as I've dug deeper, AI's, while it's 22 months old, it's everywhere. As we go forward and we start looking at legislation, when we do, any advice on how to, unintended consequences, my biggest fear in legislation, if we legislate something that would outlaw something that's being done, any advice on how to kind of bridge that as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, and Gabe can kick in, particularly for this, maybe not full, maybe there'll be a new word that we come up with, because legislate might be too difficult, right? Because things, it's needs to be agile, and you need to be able to roll back something that you decide doesn't work. So it's not really legislating probably, because that's a difficult task, or you need to potentially consider setting up something where you can take chances, you can do it for a while, and then before you put it actually into law, because we all know once it's there, it's really difficult to change. I think it's a lot about trying. So I don't have what the new word is, but
I don't know if we can legislate fluidity, but maybe that's something that where it's somewhat plausible, and that's a challenge in front of us.
Yeah, I think one potentially good idea, and I think have worked in a few states as you're starting out, is think about what are your high priority use cases, and then actually work through your public-private partnerships to go and create them from a prototype perspective. So several states have done a great job at actually setting up sandbox environments where Deloitte, along with another number of other vendors, have actually come in and tried to prove out what are the state's high priority use cases from an AI perspective. And I think having that kind of real solution that's actually applied with your data in your environment, in your organization, makes you or prepares you much better to figure out how to legislate and how to push rules forward to regulate it. But it is, like, to your point, it's a tightrope that you have to walk of, you don't want to discourage innovation by regulation, but you still want to make sure you safeguard some of the data and the outcomes of these solutions.
Absolutely. Thank y'all. Your presentation has been very informative. We thank you for your time to come. Okay, the good news is we're going to have a break after this presenter. Aaron McKinney is the policy principal with Amazon Web Services, and would like to welcome you here. The floor is yours, ma'am. At your convenience. We'll give them a moment. Yes.
Sure. All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for inviting us all here to chat with you about this technology or these technologies. My name is Erin McKinney. I am a policy counsel with the AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, state, local, and education public policy team. I am responsible for reviewing all of the legislation that Deloitte mentioned has been coming down the pike with regard to AI regulation, biometrics, privacy laws, kind of cover the gamut of tech policy in the states for my team. And obviously state governments and state legislators have been focused on AI, learning about it, getting new information, getting some feedback from our companies and others on how this technology is being used. So just a quick slide on the agenda. I want to go through, I'm going to skip over some stuff. I don't like to stand between people on a break. You've heard a lot about AI 101, some of the use cases that we feel are important in this conversation, what the regulatory landscape looks like and how it is under development worldwide, not just in the US, and what we think of as guidelines for policy development as you're thinking about that. So AI 101, this is a very simplistic slide. Wanted to give you all some perspective on these terms that you're hearing. So AI is really a way to describe any system that can mimic or replicate tasks that previously required human intelligence to perform until now. Well, for many years. The technology's been used for many decades, as you've heard, but obviously it's now in the larger conversations that we're all talking about. Machine learning is something you'll hear a lot about. This is a subset of AI that analyzes large amounts of data to determine patterns and probabilities. So some of that predictive decision-making that one of the other presenters indicated. I like to think of that as like, my son is 6 and he does like pattern recognition worksheets. So identifying, if there is 1, 2, 3, 4, that the next line would be 1, 2, 3, and then he would fill in 4. It's that simplistic when you're creating these machines and this technology. Next, you've heard a lot about large language models and generative AI. This is like the next generation that has been discussed. So generative AI basically are AI technologies that generate new synthetic content. So whether that be an image or music or videos, this is really what the highest form of the technology is that's being utilized by your offices and constituents and consumers all over the place. So you've heard a lot about use cases in AI, and I think the other presenters so far have really focused in on generative AI. I wanted to highlight some of the more, what one of my colleagues calls boring uses of AI. These are the uses of AI that have been in production and in use for many, many years. They are increasingly informing the efficiencies of state agencies, both public sector and private sector. And at Amazon, we have over 200 services, not just related to AI and machine learning, but related to cloud computing and storage and database functions. And we really have been at the forefront of developing our machine learning services in the context of the cloud services that we provide to our customers. So when we hear the term AI, it brings about ideas of things like you heard before about driverless cars and drones, and certainly Amazon and AWS have been behind the scenes working through those evolving technologies and opportunities to use AI. But you don't hear sometimes about how the technology is being used in every sector, in every industry. I like to share an example from an evolving sphere called ag tech. This is like agricultural technologies that are being used and utilizing machine learning. We have one example, a company called One Soil that basically helps farmers predict out what their crop management trend analyses should look like, and how they can manage certain weather patterns and how they may affect the crops. And it's used by over 200,000 farmers all over the world. So the data that's being collected by those farmers through cameras and other sorts of devices on their property have been useful in informing other farmers across the world about the efficiencies that can be utilized with regard to different weather patterns and how they may affect the crops or soil production, that sort of thing. On this use case chart, you'll see a lot of public sector uses of AI. And you heard earlier about document processing. We like to call it intelligent document processing. I think that's part and parcel of a lot of these areas of engagement with our customers that use that sort of machine learning service. I also like to talk about traffic optimization and public safety and crime prevention. There's all sorts of use cases that we're happy to share with you all. As you can imagine, AWS has every sort of customer. We have a really helpful tool on our website if you're ever curious. It's an AI use cases tool. So you can sort by industry, you can sort by region, you can sort by the type of customer, whether it's a government customer or private sector customer or a healthcare customer. And you can see, all of these use cases in real time and how our customers are actually putting them to good use. Okay. So I am mostly focused on what the regulatory environment is and how this landscape of AI regulation is under development, is what I like to say. So worldwide, we're seeing all sorts of agencies and organizations put forth legislation. We're seeing organizations like ISO, which is an international standards organization, putting out guidance for not only federal, state, local governments, but also, the public. How should these technologies be defined? How should they be utilized appropriately? We know about NIST. They have their risk management framework that's been published. That is really useful in informing, any policy or legislation that is being considered. These sorts of organizations are working in real time to answer the really tough questions on what this technology means, what it represents, what are the appropriate guardrails that should be in place, and providing guidance, not just to inform legislation, but also to provide guidance to basically us in the industry as we're developing these systems and providing these systems and services for our customers, making them available. You heard earlier about Colorado's recent bill that passed. That is the first comprehensive AI legislation at the state level that has passed this year. It is what we like to call more of a horizontal regulation. So it's looking to cover and legislate guardrails for high-risk AI systems. These systems, you've probably heard that term, these systems are those which make consequential decisions on an automated basis. So consequential decisions can be those which have a material or legal, similarly significant effect on the user of the tool. And this comprehensive legislation goes through various disclosures that developers like AWS should provide to deployers or customers of these services in order to really be informed about the potential pitfalls they may see, how the tool was trained, and in the spirit of transparency, providing them the information they need to run the tool effectively or the system effectively. And then deployers of those tools, which are essentially the users of a high-risk AI system, are those who need to provide impact assessments when requested. So an impact assessment would be the deployer's representation that they've gone through a variety of different steps to prove out that they're testing for algorithmic discrimination, they're testing to make sure that their intended uses of the tool are actually represented upon the output of the data that they're calling for. And then obviously worldwide, we're seeing things like the EU AI Act, and our company is doing our best to figure out how to comply with overarching regulation to that degree. We're also seeing policies and guidance come forth from CIO offices, from departments of technology. We're seeing executive orders come out from state governors. There's lots of ways in which we're helping to support our customers understand how state governments are thinking about, AI overall, not just generative AI, but AI as a totality and the full picture of that technology. Next. So again, very simple slide. Wanted you to understand how AWS thinks about regulating AI and what we see as most important. I know Gabe mentioned from Deloitte earlier, similar to one of our principles, which is that AI and machine learning should be human-centric and for the benefit of all. So that human in the loop concept is really important when you're thinking about this technology. Humans are training these tools, humans are providing the inputs, humans are asking the questions that they want this tool or the system to answer. So it's very important that any regulation be reflective of, where human input is provided and checked against. We also think that artificial intelligence is key to tackling the most challenging problems that we're seeing for humanity, whether that's curing diseases or, predicting dangerous weather patterns or ensuring that children are safe and everyone has food to eat and those sorts of things. And there's it's really exciting time to see how these systems are being used to provide some of that information. And then in terms of regulation specifically, we think regulation should be risk-based, appropriately assigned to the use case and the deployment of that tool, how that tool is going to be used, and is appropriately, understanding of what the potential risks are of using that system. And the same goes for, a governance model that was discussed earlier as well, that, the risk analysis or the risk-based approach should be utilized. So part of being here today is trying to engage proactively. We want to be a resource to all of you in terms of what this technology means, what it can provide to your districts, to those businesses in your district, to your state agencies. We want to have an open dialogue with our customers, you included. I personally consider legislators to be my customers, so I'm happy to be here and answer any questions that you have. I'm anxious to listen to more of what's being said in the later presentations, but this has been really informative, and yeah. So that's it. Is there anything that I can answer for you all that hasn't been answered yet? There's been some great questions, but I'd love to jump in with any perspective that you haven't, hasn't been satisfied yet.
Thank you for your presentation. I've got one question. The AI Act, the European Act, I understand, and I should know before I ask this question, but there are concerns with that. Can you kind of go into that a little bit and address where you think there may be some issues? Is too much too quick, I think,
Yeah.
maybe?
It's the EU AI Act is very broad legislation. So that's what we would consider another form of horizontal regulation. It's covering a lot of different areas of business and public sector uses of AI that may be going too far. And our main concern is really from a compliance standpoint. So it's been mentioned before, but how do companies like ours, how do our customers, how do they operate in the EU, not understanding how to comply with this law? And it was really under development for many, many years. It's been very interesting to see that, it was passed and announced and, there was, a lot of fanfare around it, but there's still a lot of work to be done, almost like rulemaking procedures in the US. They're going to be going through something very, very similar, and we expect that it will change very dramatically. But in terms of like the immediate needs from a compliance standpoint, that's what we're focused on. How can we ensure that, one, we're complying, of course, but also how can we help inform our customers understand how to comply?
Sure, understood. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you. You had mentioned high-risk systems.
Can you get that a little closer? I'm sorry, so they can hear online.
Sorry about that. You had mentioned high-risk systems. How was that? Is there a consensus as to what the high-risk systems are, and how was that derived?
It's been a very hot topic of debate. So you have many industries that either would like to be included in the high risk category and many industries that do not want to be included in that category. It's been a very interesting conversation to determine things like, providing government services and healthcare and, certain employment tasks to be included in like what would be considered a high risk or consequential decision, and eliminating things like, say, insurance companies or insurers, which may be better suited for like a sector specific regulation because there are so many, important terms that are very specific to that industry. And, maybe better suited to be carved out for something, not as comprehensive as these typical high risk AI system provisions that we're seeing. I will say that one big change in the discussions around what is a high-risk AI system is narrowing the scope and the aperture as carefully as possible. So initially, when those provisions were being drafted by a variety of different legislators in different states, they would often include phrases like including but not limited to. And, that really allows for a lot of, it's not a lot of clarity in terms of like something like an automated task allocation or an employment function, including but not limited could be, or not limited to, could be something as simple as scheduling and not like a resume review or something that's, maybe more critical, or the determination as to whether or not a certain person should be in a certain position versus another. Like we would consider that a potentially, high risk decision-making process. But, taking a look at, where someone should be fit in on the schedule, well, we may not consider that to be high risk, but another company may, or another organization may, depending on the makeup of their employees. So it's been ongoing, and I do expect that there will be even more fine tuning, not just of the Colorado legislation, now law, but of other legislative vehicles that we've seen and are likely to see reintroduced that were not passed in the last couple sessions. Sure.
Thank you. I believe Senator Blackman has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you expand a little more on that last point on your slide? And if you have any examples you could give us?
Yeah, so I think a great example is, the consideration of like how to determine algorithmic discrimination, for example. We were talking about bias before. And this concept, I think I've kind of beaten the drum on what a risk-based approach is, but in terms of appropriately assigning the risk management or the risk evaluation to the appropriate actor. With regard to algorithmic discrimination, we thought it was a really important adjustment to the definition that was codified to reflect that the discriminatory effects occur upon deployment of the tool. So AWS, for example, as a developer of some of these systems and tools, can provide disclosures and a lot of information to our users and deployers of the systems to say, these are the intended uses for the tool, but a deployer may have a creative solution or a creative way in which they want to use the tool in a different way or the system for something completely different. And in order to, assess the risk of using that tool in a different way, the deployer must provide the appropriate information as to like what sorts of data they're using to, provide inputs to the system and, how they're testing and retesting and making sure that, when they see, say, a discriminatory effect, that they're remedying it and they have a plan in place to do that. And there's appropriate communication with others in their organization and communication back to the developer to say, hey, this was the result that we came up with and we want you to know about it. But we want to make sure that the risk and the regulations that are being applied to the actors within what we call like the stack of using that system are appropriately applied. So as a developer, we may not know that there's a potential for a discriminatory effect when we're training the tool and developing it, but upon deployment, our deployers, customers, et cetera, come up with a result that is, not intended by the developer. So making sure that if there's, a regulatory approach that's in place, that it appropriately, characterizes what should be expected of each type of user within the stack of using that system.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your presentation, and I think I speak for both the House and Senate Technology Committees. We're glad Amazon's in Mississippi.
Thank you. We're very
Thank you
happy
for
to
your
be here.
presentation.
Thank you.
We're a little ahead of schedule. Let's take a break. The next speaker is scheduled for 3:30, but if you're okay with it, let's start at 3:15. That gives us about 20 minutes if I can stretch your legs. Thank you. part. Y'all okay? I'm gonna gavel it. They'll wander in, but I'm that guy.
Let's do it. I'm gonna start this.
I didn't see it if they did. It's 3:15, so we're going to go ahead if everybody make their way to their seats and get started. I'm here all night if y'all want to stay, but we got a storm coming, so I figure some people want to try to get out of here. Okay, okay. That's fine. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jeff Knuckles. Wow, that's good for me. With Azure, he's the director of the Azure Data and Artificial Intelligence at Microsoft, and we are very honored and welcome that you're here, sir. The floor is yours.
Honored to be here. Thank you. I'm going to talk about AI in the context of it being responsible AI, and particularly in state and local government. So I'm going to jump right in. There's some things here I want to share with you, and I want to make sure that when we walk out of this session, you guys really feel like you have a fundamental understanding of what generative AI is and how it can be applied in state and local government. So I'm going to start with this quick quote from Satya Nadella, our CEO, where he emphasizes the fact that this is going to be a profound transformation, and to not let our focus be so set on efficiencies as it is kind of the case today, and more about how we can reimagine public service. And I hope to make sure that I kind of put a staple in that today by the end of this presentation. So as this was already stated, I won't belabor the point too much, but this is not coming from a technology push down, but more from a demand from our constituents in terms of how we can leverage this technology. I think this is just kind of an example of that, to suggest that these guys were gravitating towards the use of ChatGPT, OpenAI in just 2 months to hit 100 million users is pretty extraordinary by comparison to all the other technologies that are so invasive and in our face every single day, right? So if this is any indication on the trajectory of where artificial intelligence is taking us, I think that we have some things to be in store for us. I want to start with a little bit of history of AI because I want us to understand where this comes from. In the early, actually, probably in mid-50s, we were starting with artificial intelligence by trying to do language translation, something that we figure is pretty simple to do today, but what we were trying to do and the approach that we were taking was setting rules-based configurations, like saying, okay, if they say "Здравствуйте," what does that mean in English? And it has to be very specific, and it was all rules-driven. So it was if, then, else, that, right? And that worked a little bit, but it was actually full of errors because it didn't really understand the intention. And you know, in the languages that we all speak, sometimes we have slang, sometimes we actually pronounce and enunciate words in a way that actually reflect a different tone. And so it really wasn't capitalizing on that. In 1997, we started to introduce machine learning. I have a rather large background in machine learning, but this was where we first started to introduce the idea of mathematical algorithms. So we applied math. And what we found was it had an extraordinary effect. So what we do is we have these terms, we say it vectorized a particular word so that we could understand where it fits in relationship to other words like nearest neighbors, things like that in the vocabulary space. So again, these are large languages models. We evolved this in 2017 with something that we call deep learning. To understand what that was, we have this concept of neural networks. And what I want you to understand is that neural networks, and actually I'm going to explain this a little bit later, but really just were advanced machine learning models that worked collaboratively to identify trends in the language. So now we're getting closer to truly understanding the meaning and the intention of these languages. Now we get to generative AI. So now that we understand the intention and the meaning of the language spoken, we also can now create and generate new language from this, right? So we're not just generating text, we're generating images. And as you saw earlier, we're generating video. And the big differentiators here is not only just, obviously, the cost of storage has come down. Obviously, the compute capacity is increased, but also the natural language interface. You no longer have to be a programmer writing Python code to be able to interact with these models to get the output you're looking for. You simply use your language. Just communicate with it with your words. And it seems magical, and it is in many ways. Now, this is not new to Microsoft. It's not new to us, generally speaking, in the tech industry. For decades, we've been using artificial intelligence for many things. Such as, nowadays, so you got computer vision. Computer vision can allow our police officers to wear body cam video, and we can automatically translate what's happening on the scene. But we can also allow those police officers to go home and auto-generate those reports and transcribe what had happened. So those reports are actually done in detail without error. We also use speech and language translations to be able to translate just like this. We're sitting, maybe even in courtroom settings, where we actually have multiple people presenting a case or talking, and then we can actually identify who said what, when, and we can correlate that with the video. So I have full transcriptions of everything that happened. You layer that with generative AI, and I can chat over that data. I can ask any question that I want over a 10-hour proceeding and understand exactly when it happened, what happened, and why, and how, and who. That is a differentiator. We have built artificial intelligence into our software stack that we provide to your constituents and our constituents across the US, right? These things surface up into things like Microsoft Office, so you got Office or M365. If anybody's used that or heard the term Copilot, Copilot is just that. You're the pilot of the software that you're using. You have an information assistant that is ran by GPT. And I'll explain what GPT is in a minute too, because we're using a lot of words today that I don't think is fully understood. So I want to get to that. But now it's enhancing the capabilities of these things so that you can actually have a personal assistant at your side that is all knowing of a lot of the data that it's been fed and to be able to answer any question that you have instantaneously. So before I get there, and actually I thought I had, I do. Okay, let's get there. Let's just talk about the differences here between Gen AI real quick. Now, when we talk about artificial intelligence in the context that I was just a minute ago, you've been using it already. So when you have spam filters on your phone, or you have Outlook that's actually seeing this is junk mail, it's automatically moving it. Those are artificial intelligence machine learning models that was built for a specific task. In order to get it to be able to achieve this human parity of this specific task, we fed it an enormous amount of data to achieve that task, specifically about email. We labeled it and tagged it, and we trained it over and over again until it was able to exceed that probability score of over 90%, in some cases, even closer towards 100, but certainly better than humans can on any given day and with nanoseconds in time. And so we see this repeated, these tasks, and they're actually surfaced up in our software. We've been using them, but maybe we didn't give them enough granted. But now things have changed. What's changed? Why is generative AI? What is a large language model? Okay. First of all, ChatGPT. GPT, most people don't even understand what that is. It's a generative pre-trained transformer. And basically, I'm going to explain how this is set up today. So we gave these models, if you will, an instruction set that was not tied to a specific set of data for a specific task, but just the entire corpus of the internet data. So the data set is as massive as the internet has to offer so it's coming from Wikipedia, blog sites, news media outlets. If you type something up, it's out there. If it's coming from any kind of digital publication that you can find on the internet today. And then everything else in terms of books and things that maybe aren't even out there that we've been providing it and feeding it. And so it starts training on this data to understand language and how it's applied in multiple disciplinary places, like in the medical field, in the law field, and understanding the language and the lingo and acronyms and everything else. So now we have what we call a foundational model that can perform just about any of those tasks equally, if not better, than the individual AI models we had before. Language is a powerful tool to learn. So we're finding that out today. So effectively what you have now is a large language model. I wanted to explain this one more time, just in a sense of how it works with your brain. Look at this sentence, misspelled here, right? What is the capital of Mississippi? Capital with an A in this case. If you were just going to read that, your brain instantly knows what I'm asking. But how would a computer system know? So what we did is we created these mathematical models to be able to reason over that data. Now, what you see here in the middle are these hidden layers. This is where the magic happens. Now I've only depicted, oh, you're not seeing that, sorry. You're kind of seeing that. Some words are over it, but Anyway, nonetheless, your brains instantly pick up on what this means and how to be able to answer that question. Of course, it's Jackson. Let's just go there directly. But what your brain did is it fired off a series of neurons, thousands, millions of neurons fired off at any given point in time in parallel to be able to ration over that question, understand even with the misspelling what you were asking for. You weren't asking for the capital letter. You weren't talking about capital expenditures. You weren't talking about a building in particular. The answer at the end of the day and how it rationalizes and figures that out concludes that you are actually talking about capital with an O and that you were talking about the capital city in this particular case. That's exactly how these machine learning models work as well. When I said neural networks, it's just like the neurons in your brain. We're mimicking the brain's capacity to ration over data and language to be able to derive an outcome. And when it does that, it's not infallible. It makes mistakes, doesn't always get it right, just like we don't. But it has a probability score that you've heard today. And as you can see here, it has a 0.9, that's basically 90 percentile. And by the way, ChatGPT scored in the 90 percentile in the bar exam. And it's actually exceeding the average scores of just about any human that's taken it. That's pretty impressive. And we all know it's not easy to take, right? All right. So what does this mean for government? I want to step through some use cases here, but I also want to talk about how we got here and what's changed in our landscape. And it is our constituents. It is the users. And I'm not talking about the digital native, children like my kid who just walks up to a TV and swipes it because he doesn't want to watch the commercial, right? I'm talking about people out there who are actually leveraging digital services. And now COVID, that onset of COVID actually kind of pushed us in this direction. There's a whole lot of things that kind of happened that really interestingly just manifested our ability to be able to even recognize how we're going to utilize AI and digital technology to transform how we actually engage with our public, from public services perspective. They started using their phones because they couldn't go out, just to do simple tasks like order groceries, food, things of that nature. And it really set their expectations a little bit high as to what they expect from our government too. Okay, so that transformed. And then all of a sudden, we were hit with somewhat of a deficit in terms of our manpower. From 2019 to 2023, I think we lost nearly 1 million state employees and an aging population, somewhere between the ages, at least from the surveys that we've gotten, between 45 and 64. And so there's definitely some things that have changed to catalyze, as catalysts to get us to where we're at. And of course, these mandates and establishing trust from the federal and state and local governments. And there is a significant amount of trust out there, but I think that this also presents us with an opportunity. Everybody says, hey, show me some transparency. I want to be able to say, I want to be able to optimize my self-service capabilities to get access to services from the government, whether it's just getting, SNAP benefits or whatever the case is. How easy or difficult is that to do? Now that one you would think would be fairly simple, but you'd be surprised at how complex it is just to get the answers to those questions. Simple questions. And we put out there things like frequently asked questions and things like that, but those are stagnant. They don't understand the nuance of how somebody might ask that or the languages in which they might want to ask that. So it gets a little more interesting. Now, here's an example of New York City who did a public use case for their constituents, and they were targeting business services, okay? I have a series of use cases and things in here I can provide you, but this one was interesting because it says, now, if I want to start a business in Brooklyn, what kind of permits do I need? Where do I even start? I have no idea. And if you go out to the public facing website, you're going to have to peruse through thousands of PDF documents, series of web pages. Just like if you were to do a Bing or Google search or something like that today, you're going to be presented with a series of links and you're going to be right clicking and, open a new tab. And how many of us have like 50 tabs open on our computer at any given time, right? Just to do basic research. And we're going to spend hours curating through that data. In this case, it simply takes all that information, it indexes it. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of semantic search indexers and vector-based databases, but you got to understand that mathematically, it knows exactly where in the data to go find the answers to your question, even if it's citing 5 or 6 different PDF documents or websites, okay? And it brings it all to you in a very simple bulleted format or however you ask to receive it. I'll demonstrate this in a bit. But this had a profound impact on those business services. And we're already seeing this with imagine 311 and various scenarios. If I just want to find out where my garbage is, or if I want to sign up for Medicaid services, these are all good examples of how to be able to leverage generative AI to get answers to questions, okay? So again, this was about making a service friendly and not frustrating. reducing the amount of friction between the constituents and those of which, are providing that service. So there are a variety of states. This is obviously a subset of the variety of states that are out there that are providing policy and executive orders and things to help be able to create a format for us to be able to leverage artificial intelligence responsibly across our state and agencies. And so Alabama, yes, they just posted one out here, the 738, just very recently, in fact. I'm not sure the exact date, it was very recent. And some others that are out there as well. And all of these actually are in my deck as well. So if anybody wants links to all of these orders and policies, I have them. In fact, what an easy thing or interesting thing to do. Take all of those orders, take all of them, and add them into a generative AI system and ask it to produce for you a draft that we can start from. What a baseline, interesting way to be able to start this. And of course, you want to verify, validate, go through, make sure it meets. And you know what? Come back with an additional prompt. Say, you know what? I want to make sure that I emphasize stricter guidelines around this specific thing, whether it's P2I or HIPAA compliance or anything like type of sensitive information. You can actually just tell the system to emphasize those ports to make it very specific to the state of Mississippi. All right, let's talk about some of the stuff that I get paid to do, which is answer tough questions about responsible artificial intelligence. And there are dangers and there are risks and there are concerns and they are valid. So we shouldn't run away from or steer from and say, let's jump in and run, right? There's good places, there's good use cases that we can jump in and start today. And there's others that maybe we want to delay to the point where we actually have better guidelines around it, right? Just to make sure that we've locked it down, we secured it. Now at Microsoft, we're no strangers to this. We've been doing this for a long time and we have things and tools that can help us get there as well. But in terms of privacy and security, I know that I don't even have to ask for a show of hands. I know we're all concerned about data leakage and being able to exchange information with these models and have it be persisted and be able to train those models and improve the services of those. Those are things that could be valid concerns, and they are valid concerns, because if you're going out there right now, and I can assure you, state employees, as is the constituents, they're out there summarizing big documents or asking you to generate documents based off other information, and they're using those open models that traverse the public sphere. And those open models make, they certainly can and will be able to utilize that information to improve and refine the models. So careful and caution should be expressed there, right? So also the perception of bias. Absolutely, there's bias in it, right? Now, I heard this said before, but I wanted to understand, where is the data? So these models are learning from a large corpus of information, but where did the data come from? Other humans that had opinions, right? And maybe had a narrative or what have you. Wikipedia changes their mind every time, or somebody else that's writing a blog site or somebody else that's on a news media outlet and they've got their opinions. And we see that they're kind of skewed away from the truth because they have a narrative. It's learning from those things. So I don't want you to fear though. Understand this, the models learn what they learn to understand language, but that doesn't have to be the data that you use to be able to use those use cases I was mentioning before. I'll talk to you about grounding your data in the truth that you have. So your data, the data quality issue is important, but when you provide your data, it can only use that. And you tell the model, it is absolutely steerable. You tell the model, I only want you to use the data that I've provided. You have no other use of any other data. Only answer in sheer fact and only give me the answers back, right? That is a steerable model. That's exactly how it should be used. That gets away from hallucinations, and it also gets away from bias in many cases. So I want to make sure, and not to say that our data that we provide doesn't have bias, but that's the point. Let's make it clear and grounded on the data that we provide publicly to our constituents that we feel confident in, and then we can provide this in the form of a chat bot or something like that for them to be able to ask questions over. An accurate output I kind of addressed. There's a litmus test of things you could probably put against these things. We actually have what's called a red team service here at Microsoft that allows us to be able to come in and effectively attack it and try to get it to do like what we call jailbreaks, be able to try to basically hack it with prompts and be able to give it an output that would be inappropriate or whatever the case is. And we do this internally, and we do this, provide this as a service as well. So our journey has been long and it's been short. The thing is it's all relative, right? So in 2016, Satya Nadella, and our president pinned responsible AI principles, kind of just a document to start us here. I'm not sure why that's not entirely showing up on your screen there. Let me try to, there we go. Okay. And so then we created a body that, a council that basically was an advisory to our responsible AI, our Office of Responsible AI. We created engineering blueprints and practices so that everybody who created or worked on any product at Microsoft, because I'm assure you, every product at Microsoft has AI. Every engineer at Microsoft has been, read in on exactly how they have to engineer according to these blueprints and these principles and must adhere to them. And then we actually created tools, because the whole point was you never write software anymore that just is kind of like, I'm writing it to see if it functionally creates the output that I'm looking for. No, we actually create attack surfaces to make sure that it creates the output that we're looking for, just like that red team. We've actually made these tools also available to you guys to use if you actually write your own machine learning models or leverage this technology. And we're continuing to do that. We've actually been coordinating with what you might think are our competitors in this field, to like, and you can maybe make note of this, it's a c2pa.org, which stands for the Coalition of Content Prevalation and Authenticity. So when we talk about concerns over somebody creating deep fakes and videos and images, you can literally pull any voice, any face, and kind of make them say whatever you want. So how do we actually do cryptographic embedding in those so that we know that this was a fake? And so this is what we're doing. We're working with even our considered competitors in this space cooperatively to make sure that this stuff is actually, kind of brought to the forefront, that we can prevent that from happening. Also, we provide a Microsoft Responsible AI Transparency Report that you can download and see exactly about how we actually create our AI services, what's the traceability of it, everything that you would probably want to know about leveraging Azure OpenAI, which is the, if you guys say ChatGPT, that's from OpenAI, their models. We use those models. And I'll explain a little bit how that is right now. So those models that they create, if you're going out to ChatGPT, they're a wonderful partner of ours. They are the de facto leader, at least from a large language model out there today. And you're going to see it just kind of jostle around. I hope all our competitors are chomping at the bit to be the number one. And because it makes us all better by getting these models out there. And I don't mean just better at being able to produce these generative tasks, but better at being able to secure them and make sure that we're producing, unbiased, fair content that is equitable for everybody to use. So we bring them in-house and we make them available to you. These be available in your own subscription. So when I say that, this is where you have access to it. Microsoft doesn't, right? It's your subscription. If you're familiar with cloud in general, it's an extension of your network, your infrastructure, but these services become available to you. We provide this is just the same as any other Azure service that we would provide for anything, like an Azure database or storage or a virtual machine or whatever the case is. We want to make sure you have enterprise-grade security, that you have, that it adheres to our responsible AI principles, that it supports the regulatory compliance that's needed to be able to actually provide services in state and local government, as well as having a service level agreement of available uptime and availability. And the list goes on, audit tracking and content safety and all of these things that are absolutely critical and paramount. So big question that comes up all the time, big concern, valid concern. If my data is provided to this model, is it protected? Is it safe? And from a Microsoft's perspective, I'm giving you our point of view here, because when we actually deploy these models, we deploy them into your subscription where you have your data, okay? That's protected, secured by you with role-based access, encryption, and everything else that you would have to absolutely have. Private endpoints, not traversing over the public internet, but a private point-to-point connection between your infrastructure and ours, okay? And also too, understand this about these models. They're stateless. And I know maybe off the top, stateless doesn't mean anything, but really what it means is that the models themselves have no ability to persist data. Okay, they have an input and an output. They have an input, they can process all this stuff, and then they have an output. So they'll receive your prompt. I don't know why we keep calling it prompt. It's your question, anything that you're telling the system to do, call it a prompt, user prompt. And then you provide a subset of data or whatever data that you want the model to utilize, and you give it a system prompt. It tells it how it's supposed to be able to act and behave and what persona it's supposed to act as. It's like, I want you to be jovial. I want you to be professional. I want you to be serious. Whatever you want it to do in its reaction to the output, you can literally steer it to be anything you want. and it will produce that output, but it has no ability to persist it. What happens is when you actually are going out there and talking to those public models that don't have these security principles in place, and they actually can store some of your data, it's not happening at the model layer, it's happening at the interface layer, which is the UI, which is maybe the web application or something in between, okay? So the models don't have this, they're stateless. And I just want to make that clear. So here's our responsible AI principles. And these are the bedrock of how we go to market with any AI service, not just generative AI. Generative AI just happens to benefit from the fact that we already had this in place before it came along. But being able to be fully transparent, being able to show how did it come to this answer? What kind of data did it use to get there? What was the thought process to be able to answer this kind of thing? Accountability, this kind of comes not just by way of service level agreements, but making sure that Microsoft is accountable. If you produce any content too, that is copyright and infringement, protected and things like that, because it should be, right? If you produce content, that's inclusive and fair, right? And that we're trying to eradicate any kind of bias, and that is something that I think absolutely must be done by grounding it in your data. I want to come back to that in a minute. So let's get to a couple of use cases, and if I have a couple minutes, I'd like to do a quick demonstration. If that's okay. So there's basically, I see this in two categories of use cases. Obviously, one is constituent public facing, and the other one is internal state, right? State employees who maybe want to use this. I think that when we look at how I've seen other states and agencies start and deploy generative AI, they usually start with internal use cases. Okay, we saw in New York City. There's a list of other ones I can provide you that are doing it for public as well. But of course, it's not like sensitive data. It's actually data that they already probably provide on their public-facing website, or information that they want their constituents to be able to have that they created and controlled, not something that the model just learned from, as it was being built and then serving that back up. We wouldn't do that. That's probably not a good best practice. Let's just start there, okay? And the same can be true for state agency information. I mean, I've been working with a lot of them, but just simple things like onboarding a new employee, giving them, information to be able to know how to access their benefits and sign up for direct deposit, or, can I use my vehicle for public, service? And can I do any of these things? I just want a quick answer. I don't want to have to spend my entire day that I'm getting paid to work on something else to figure out how to do my job. That's a simple, easy use case. It's very tangible, and absolutely you can run with that today. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very common one too, but policies just in general, just, what's our internal policies, manuals for how to, operate this big Medicaid system, stuff like that. So again, here's some of the core use cases. We've seen a lot about the fact that it can generate content, summarizing large court cases. We've worked so many of these. So I worked with, Child Protective Services, where we had these case logs that were just endless deep. And we know it's difficult to be able to prepare for a court hearing or to be able to find and identify fraud that happens probably more often than we would like to admit. But how do we find that? We can actually find this information leveraging this technology. I can summarize those 10,000. I can identify the fact that, this person who says they're a sibling is not actually a sibling, they're a first cousin, right? And identify and eradicate some of the fraud that's being happened against us in these, for the most sensitive people, right? And of course, code generation is some of the other fun stuff. So I've been a programmer most of my professional life. It would have been nice to have had this a long time ago. So 311, easy, low-hanging fruit, publicly faceable use case. This is something that could be deployed to the public today. Providing a chatbot allows somebody just to ask when my garbage can be picked up. When does it happen? It happens on Wednesday? No, it's a holiday, so it's gonna be Thursday, whatever the case may be. Just to be able to ask simple questions and to provide real answers, okay? Ohio, Department of Motor Vehicles, Bureau of Motor Vehicles, I'm sorry, basically process millions of documents per year. And it's very complicated because sometimes addresses change or they get conflicted, they have to send it back. There's all kinds of manual labor that goes into processing these documents and also just resending it back. So being able to automate the process of these documents is just a very simple task, just to be able to identify all of the data. So somebody mentioned OCR, object character recognition, another AI model. Basically, I can take anything that you give me and I can extract all of the data out of that and make it searchable for you. You can ask any question about it, instantaneous. And also be able to identify certain correlations between other data sets, which helps with fraud, which helps with things like this. And here's a list of other things. Now, I'm going to really quickly jump out of here because I want to show you really quickly. And I spun this up in my environment. Hopefully you can see it. So this is just a Azure OpenAI deployment. This is specifically developed for public sector. Anyway, you can come in here and I can upload it. I uploaded some public data from Mississippi's Medicaid about how to access Medicaid and just ask questions about it. Now, I know that there's a chatbot out there today, but if I ask this same question to a chatbot, like, what are the eligibility requirements for Medicaid? It's not going to tell me. It's going to, maybe ask me a few more categorical questions just to send me to the right part of the site. But I feel that there's a real opportunity. I've been working with the Medicaid department, which I think is probably a little further along the way than I probably even know at this point. But just to be able to ask simple questions like this and have it immediately come back. Now, the citations may be from more than one document. So it instantly comes up, it presents this to me in a readable format, so I can just instantly understand what are the eligibility requirements, let's say. But let's say I wanted to ask something like how, and my cat blocks are on, how do I sign up? Now, you notice that I'm not saying, how do I sign up for Medicaid benefits? I don't have to. I'm having a conversation where somebody, in this case, Azure OpenAI, understands the context of our conversation and maintains that. Understands the relationship of what I'm asking for. Now it's pulling up some information here, but maybe, maybe it's not exactly, it's also citing maybe 4 different citations here to give that. Otherwise, I would have had to have looked this up in 4 different places. But I can also say things like, you know what, this is not how I understand it. Give this to me in steps and in Spanish. It doesn't matter what the source of the information is or what language it's in. It will give it to me exactly as I ask. If I asked it to tell me this as a pirate, it would give me arg, all that good stuff. Right? I'm not going to mimic a pirate, but you get the idea, right? It's absolutely steerable. And let me just show you again kind of what I mean by that. I can tell it the person who's going to be using this and what their persona is. I can tell the system that it's not just a assistant, but maybe it's a legal assistant. And I need it to be able to respond to me as if I'm asking for legal advice. And I need it to understand that kind of language. So, and I need it to be very succinct, right? Right click. I need it to be very precise. I don't want it to get too creative, because creative is the generative aspect. I could ask this to write out these steps as a poem or a haiku. That'd be kind of hard, but it can do it. It would do it if I told it to do it. So anyway, these are just some examples, and I think that I'm kind of up on my time here, so I would like to maybe see if there's some questions that I can entertain. And I hope that this was informative too, because my goal is, and I understand there's a lot of fear and uncertainty when there's a lack of understanding about what these things are. There's valid points, and there's also valid reasons we should be using it.
Very informative, very informative. Do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am, madam.
I've noticed the word hallucination a couple of times. Could you explain that a little bit deeper, please?
Certainly, and this often happens a lot when a system doesn't have enough data to work with. So, and sometimes it's just if it doesn't have enough good data to work with. So what happens is if I asked a question about, like, let's say the eligibility, it might give me a wrong answer completely, just completely off. And we call that a hallucination, but it's really just, you just got it wrong, right? You came back with the wrong answer. The way that these models work best is if I give it a better, more thorough system prompt, like not just what are the eligibility requirements, but if I were to say, listen, I'm of this age, I'm in this district, this is what I'm looking for, this is my income level. If I gave it some more information, say, I need to know how to get this, and I need to know how to do it by the end of the month, give it all this information, it's less likely to hallucinate. So when we start getting more comfortable with generative AI, we're going to get more comfortable with not doing keyword searches. We're going to get more comfortable with providing very descriptive questions so that we get a better answer, and it does not hallucinate in that sense.
Is hallucination and drift synonymous in the context of this conversation?
That's correct.
Concerns been expressed by several members today. The bias conversation, I think, something that's going to be at the forefront as we go forward and trying to ensure that it's as least biased as possible. As we said, the analogy I've used, if you gave us all the assignment to read To Kill a Mockingbird and do a book report, and we come back in here tomorrow, they're going to be vastly different. we read the same words, but we came to different conclusions because of our bias or the optics or our experiences. How do we start to get around that subject when we start to try to, keep the bias out from a legislative perspective? That's just a tough one.
I would first ask that you partner with experts like Microsoft in this case.
Absolutely.
And we would love to work with you on that because very specifically, not to get too technical, but remember I said you can steer these things. I can steer it by giving it a more of an elaborate and detailed question, but behind the scenes, underneath the covers, what you can do is there's called system prompts. Okay, system prompts tells the system how it should behave, and you can also provide what's called like few shot learning or things like this. Basically, you're giving it a series of questions, like answers that you would expect to see it get, and it should have this type of answer and feedback. Part of that system prompt and that this is like the first step. And when you feed it that system prompt and you tell it only give data based on the source that is grounded, it's only on the grounded data that I provided. Do not give me back data from the model itself or the internet or anything else. Okay, let's just make sure we're just, and if you don't know the answer, just say, I do not know. Okay, if it's not facts-based in the data, don't give me an answer. Just give me an answer if I don't know. Then you have another option, which you take it to another level, which is called fine-tuning the model, which is saying, I'm going to feed a data set into a model that it's going to understand that it's now going to be trained on your data. Now, let that not fear you because this model is now living in your tenant inside your Azure subscription. You own and control it. It's not one that's out there in the public sphere. Okay? No one else is accessing it. So you can feed it that data. It's now a fine-tuned model. Now it understands your data more intimately and not just understanding general language and or a data set which you're providing a subset of. And now we're getting to very, very precise output.
Thank you.
So the ethics behind this, for instance, I used ChatGPT to produce a Sunday school lesson for this Sunday's class. And so I'm going to say that I've used artificial intelligence, but because I just feel like that's necessary for them to know that. But at what level are we honest about using it? Like, is it individual contents that we're working off here, or is there something other states have realized that this? I almost feel like I'm stealing somebody else's knowledge. Does that make sense?
It does. So, and honestly, I think when you're using it, you're generating new content. I don't think it's necessarily an integrity issue, provided you say that I've created this curriculum based on, a large language model. It generated this for me. I've provided the parameters by which I want it to be able to provide this output. So you still have a stake in that. And actually what's interesting about that is that content that you create using these models can be copyrighted.
What?
It can be copyrighted. So you can actually protect the content that's being generated from.
Even though I said I'm Billy Graham, I've been in the ministry for 50 years and produce a lesson the way that I have taught over the years, then it's my knowledge after that.
I think there we've kind of crossed the line. Where you said
Okay,
you're
okay.
But yeah,
It's true. It's that advanced user that the task, the content, all of that matters, and how you ask the question. And that depends on how, and even to say, I want you to the heart of it, like put some heart in it. And it's all very interesting how you do. I did 3 different ones on 3 different preachers, and it was incredible how the 3 preachers that I listened to, and it's incredible how it literally sounds like those 3 people.
Yes, it can absolutely mimic the voice of those people, produce the content of them just in the exact same, in their voice, in their mannerisms. It's kind of the beauty of the creativity aspects of it. But I understand it can also raise some concern because we can actually impersonate, and that's a problem. So we're working with, like those coalitions of content prevalence and authenticity to make sure that we're trying to threat that out, make sure that doesn't happen. We're also working with a variety of, everybody in the industry leaders to make sure that we're trying to find ways to put like cryptographic digital imprints into the content that's being generated so that it's easily identifiable when somebody actually goes and says, this is my paper, I wrote it. No, you didn't. So we're continuing to make some pretty good headway there. Now, when we first launched this, we didn't. So we're getting there now.
As we go down the path of intellectual property, if you will, to kind of elaborate a little bit, I write a 2-page short story and I feed it into a generative AI model. On the other side of that, I get a 600-page novel. At what point, and again, from a policy perspective, you know, I mean, the ethics question, I guess they're entwined. How do we determine when that is mine or not? If I'm trying to protect that, you said you can copyright it. I guess if you got the idea on the spark, and a lot of books are culminations of dozens of people as they sit together over a period of time, we're just doing that a lot quicker in a way. How do we create policy around there? How do we approach that perspective from intellectual property perspective?
So not being a legal expert myself, I asked this question internally too. And I think the way that we said, because we are providing copyright protection on content generated using Azure OpenAI, okay, Microsoft.
Yes.
And I think the way that it's been described is kind of think of it like this. If you were a painter and you created your own painting, it's yours. The authenticity of that, use signature. If somebody were to mimic that, it would be different. But when you're creating it, you're using these tools, you're using a brush. In this case, the Azure OpenAI model would be the brush, right? It is basically the tool for which you're using to generate it. But we know that it's pulling and sourcing data from all kinds of things the large language models leveraged. But you'll find that there's a lot of creativity in how we actually talk to these models and ask it to create things and steer it so that we can create very unique content. And I mean, not just text, but images, video, art, in a lot of ways, music.
That's a good analogy. That makes sense. Again, to pivot a little bit from a general sense, we've used the term, a few years ago, we did a revenge porn bill, then a porn bill, then the sextortion bill. As we go forward, you know, guardrails is kind of where we start. Any recommendations on what we look at as we, again, look to codify things and start to put, I would assume, broad guardrails initially as we go down this path?
Yes, and a lot of the guardrail scenarios that I've seen is putting a council, like a task force. This is great because this is where we're starting, right? And having a council and advisory body for specific type use cases that may have to use any kind of proprietary state information that might be intellectual property or just sensitive in nature. Those must get vetted before they can actually go forward from a use case perspective. Short of that, publicly accessible information gets kind of, you know, fast tracked from a use case perspective, even though all of them have to meet these criteria. And I've seen this played out, and a lot of these policies that have been written specify this. They'll say things like, you know, you must show and demonstrate how you try to address bias, you know, things like that, or transparency. You must be able to demonstrate, like in this case, let me show you something real quick in terms of demonstrating transparency. I want to be able to go and say, what was the thought process behind this? You know, we talked about, it tokenized my question to say Medicaid. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't read in Spanish. But it basically tokenized this and shows me exactly the path and the thought process it took to come back with the response. So what was the question? What is the actual system prompt? What does it tell me to do? I should have done this in English. Let me actually, can I go up real quick and show you in English? Like this thought process. Okay, so it looks at the system role and it says, you know, you are an Azure OpenAI completion model. Your persona is that of an assistant, but it could have said legal assistant, could have said anything, but I'm telling it how to respond. It shows me the full thought process. Even the data that was provided to the model, because the model is stateless, it has no access to the data itself, but what data did you provide it? Give me all of the subset of the data that you provided it, and what was the output? So you have to be able to show that from a transparency perspective. If we can't do that, that use case doesn't go forward. Stuff like that. So, you know, we try to work with, in fact, we have, councils and bodies internally at Microsoft that can work with you on helping draft some of these things as well. And we've worked with many, but that's also why we've published all this responsible AI stuff. And I think you guys may have had a handout too that may talk to it a little bit as well.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On one of your slides, you were talking about the safety and security of Microsoft Cloud. I think towards the bottom in yellow, it said that the models are stateless. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so stateless is a term, it's really kind of a technical term, and I apologize for that because really what that means is it has, if you think about browsers, they used to say cookies could persist state. That was basically, if you had something in you know, like an out, like your shopping cart, it would persist who you were and everything that was in your cart kind of thing. So it would collect that data and persist it. And so those are stateful. This is stateless, and that his has no ability to persist any data about you or the questions you're asking or the data that you're providing it. So the models themselves have no ability to do that. However, must know that those who provide those models or the application interfaces to them can intercept that data because you're typing it right here into this text box. I can persist that into a database. In fact, we recommend it because you might want to make sure that we have content safety controls within Microsoft to be able to rate and give you a severity score in terms of, is this inciting harm, violence, sexual content, or anything of the like, and it gives it a severity score. And you have the option to look at that severity score and determine whether or not you allow it to automatically process the output, or it needs somebody to take hands and eyes to look at it. And so while it has no ability to persist itself, it still can be done through the UI, and we want to make sure that we give every opportunity to avoid that if we can, except for those purposes of content safety. So stateless just means I can't store your data.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Anything else? Thank you very much, again, for a very informative presentation. We got a lot to soak in.
Thank you very
much. Glad you're here. This brings us to our final speaker of the day, Dr. Craig Ogeron, who is ITS director, and I've had the privilege of working with him some over the last couple of months, and I think the department's in good hands, and he's going to take it from here. Dr. Ogeron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's only appropriate when I talk about AI to not have slides and to use paper. Better. I had the great pleasure of actually working at ITS, the dawn of the internet age, and working at ITS when the internet became part of how government did business. And we built some of the very first applications to do that in government. I think AI, specifically generative AI, as I think Jeff so aptly talked about with the committee, is that next generation of amazingly innovative technology that is going to mean that we're going to do government different, we're going to do business different, and we're going to live differently. Whether it's a Sunday school lesson or making government operations run more smoothly. So what I want to do today is talk through what the AI landscape looks like and really kind of dig into some of the business results and talk through some metrics at a very high level about where the industry really is. There's always a tremendous amount of hype with these technologies. In this case, the hype in many cases is warranted. It is amazing what these models can do. It's transformative in how it's going to transform business and for certainly how it's going to transform how we do government. So from the very beginning, and I think Jeff actually mentioned this metric, 5 days to 1 million users with ChatGPT. The next nearest platform was Instagram, which was about 2.5 months. First year, 100 million users on ChatGPT. In its second year, 200 million users. So growth over growth over growth. The GPU, the chips that are running this technology are groundbreaking and sort of continue to follow Moore's law, which is every year to 18 months, which you put on an integrated circuit means that it's doubling in capacity. And there is no slowdown on that front whatsoever. What I want to do today is touch on sort of 7 key areas conversationally and sort of talk through the state of AI, the state of generative AI, where organizations really are in terms of adoption. So you do have profound individual use, but even private sector companies that are attempting to use this technology to differentiate are struggling going from individual use to use cases at scale, and use cases at scale that we can measure and understand the impact of those. So 67% of organizations are increasing investments due to value. And you've probably heard all day today what that value is. So typically efficiency, productivity, and cost reduction. I think those use cases are novice-based use cases. That's where we're seeing ourselves right now, right, in terms of what we can do. Typically, those conversations about those use cases are potentially risk-driven, risk versus good. Many times the risk components are rooted in data, data privacy, and sort of concerns about what these models and tools are telling us, right? Is it rendering a diagnosis that's helping my physician to help me in terms of the impact of that? Or is it making other processes in my organization more efficient? So, you know, in healthcare, you hear about these examples, right? You've heard of examples of the amazing things that it can do. One of the first two use cases that I heard about in healthcare were janitorial service in a hospital, streamlining when patients are discharged and intake for another patient, right? So you can sort of see the difference here. That's very much about a business. It's very much about efficiency. It's very much about streamlining, but it's not AI telling me what's wrong with my knee. I think we'll get there, right? And so this productivity gain that we're seeing is rooted in looking at what those risks are and using these tools to make a pretty profound impact. So in some of the most recent data, we talked about 67% of organizations are increasing investments. 58% of those report diverse benefits, such as specific innovations at about 12%, improving services, and better customer relationships. So in our world, that would be constituent relationships, and what might that mean? So here's a key quote that I think is pretty interesting in this space. Generative AI has enabled machines to potentially transition from tools to teammates. Tools to teammates. Some organizations are actually calling some of these tools robo-colleagues. This technology may actually grow into something just like that, a virtual teammate, an agent, if you will, that helps us do our business quicker, faster, and more effectively, which can be a profound impact on how we deliver government, profound impact. This represents a shift in public sector roles where AI can augment decision-making, administrative processes, and certainly improve efficiency and outcomes across what we do in government. This reflects a shift from AI from sort of thinking of it in terms of simple automation, which is how we refer to many things, right? Workflows get automated, right? I'm out, I'm using a document management system, I sign it, it goes from me to the next person in an automated way. That shift is really from automation to true collaboration. True collaboration with these models and with these tools that can help us to do business differently. So in terms of scaling these tools, right? So where the industry is really now is there's probably a lot of individual use. You have a monthly subscription to a ChatGPT or Claude if you've used Anthropic, and you're using this in your daily life, right? That may be responding to an email, writing a recommendation letter for an employee or a student, those sorts of things. These organizations that are seeking to use this at scale are using pilots to do that. Nearly 70% of organizations have moved about 30% or so of their experiments into production. I think that's a really interesting metric, right? So there's a lot of innovation going on in terms of proofs of value or pilots, but a relatively smaller number of those are being put into use. And I think it's worth having a conversation, even if it's from the private sector, talking about how government should approach this. Here are some of the reasons that I think are pretty interesting. Key barriers potentially include the quality of the data, which I think Jeff did a fabulous job of talking about. Managing risks, actually coming up with what those risks are, right? And being able to talk about them, and navigating a pretty intensely changing regulatory environment, right? So we know that on the heels of GDPR, there's pretty landmark legislation in Europe on AI, and there's a law in California, Senate Bill 1047, that has gotten a lot of press that's attempting to do some regulatory work in that regard as well. Those are worth looking at. They're fascinating to look at, to understand from a policy perspective, Mr. Chairman, as you talked about, what are the things that we need to think about? That conversation typically pivots on not stifling innovation, right? We want our private sector companies to innovate, and we want to use those tools in the private sector to differentiate, right, to grow our businesses. And in government, we want to be able to do our jobs better, right, with these tools, to serve our citizens, to be able to do more with the things that we have. And I think that's critical. Modernizing data foundations is a critical step. And here's what I will say about this. These models, and Jeff talked about it, and our speakers today talked about it, are stunning, what they can do technically. They're just stunning, what they can produce. But I think it's worth remembering that behind those models is data. And I think Jeff talked about this as well, right? So we have to think about on the government side, right? So talking about generative AI, talking about the latest and upcoming model from OpenAI, which is codenamed Strawberry, can solve the New York Times connections puzzle pretty quickly, probably faster than I can. If it beats me in Wordle, I'm over it. I'm not going to do that anymore. But I want you to think about that. The data management piece is a much less sexy topic, to be candid, but it is absolutely critical, because some of these models may eventually be trained on the data that we have, right, in our agencies to help us do our job better. I think we need to pay attention to that. I think we need to talk about that and think about that. So given that exact point, private sector organizations are modernizing these data foundations. 75% of organizations are increasing investment in their data lifecycle management. That is telling. The private sector is doing it, right, as good stewards of their data, as well architected and curated as that data is. They are doubling down. The most recent information of last week suggests. Data issues prevent about 55% of organizations from fully realizing the capabilities of generative AI. Security is a concern, and ultimately improving data quality. Of those, 41% of organizations struggle to define and measure the impact of their initiatives. So in addition to really talking about the data management piece and not forgetting that part that sort of underlies how these models perform, I think it's really critical to remember that you have to be able to measure these things. I think that's a specific takeaway for government. You have to measure these. The private sector is struggling. Quantitative metrics are going to become increasingly important as organizations move from the pilot phase, which is what we're talking about right now, to what we call AI at scale. Large-scale deployments across organizations, divisions of organizations, elements of multinational corporations, or where we live here, our agencies and government. Recent research suggests that 38%, about only 38% track these changes related to specific employee productivity. And even fewer produce reports on savings. 2 key points, right? We obviously don't want to come off as Big Brother or anything like that, but I think the key here is you've got to really think about performance management. You've really got to think about what are the key indicators that you're seeking to measure. So if I were to come in and talk about a use case, how ITS is using it, or how we're partnering with agencies to use it, I would absolutely expect questions, right? I had a pilot. My pilot was a specific use case and a classic statement on measurement, right? I sought to do this process or that process 15% quicker, and I freed up 7 person hours to do that, right? So I think that's the second key takeaway: data management and performance measurement. So the key benefits of generative AI you've heard about today, and you'll hear about tomorrow. So the ability to improve efficiency, it is legitimate and real, right? The fact that the Sunday school lesson can be produced, right? So ethical questions, bias questions are absolutely relevant, but the fact remains that there was an output that was produced in a much, much quicker time than it would have been produced in any way. That's a given. It's also a teaser, right? Because any place in our processes in government that we can get more efficient, this is the tool of this generation to be able to do that. These tools have suggested there are significant improvements to be had in the creation and management of work. Employees are using it to create and edit documents and spend far less time to do that. So very straightforward, right? Look for these efficiencies. Think about your data and manage the metrics coming out of how you apply this, right? So if I'm going to come and I'm going to walk into a budget hearing, I'm going to be ready for those conversations, right? How I made my process better, how I served the constituents better, and what I have to do. So in addition to efficiency, there's this ability to, on the heels of it, reduce cognitive load, right? Repetitive tasks. There are lots of organizations that have repetitive tasks. So from drafting emails to potentially summarizing meetings, right? So the backdrop here is the backdrop, right? So privacy and all of those concerns, which I'll talk about briefly and hopefully take questions on, is still there. But there's no doubt that the tasks that we have in front of us every day, our employees and our agencies, in addition to seeking to be more efficient, they can reduce that cognitive load. They can offload, if you will, some of those tasks to do what it is that they have to do better. Certainly the ability to optimize meetings, and most importantly, in terms of Mississippi.gov, our state portal, which this year was ranked 4th in the country, I'm proud to say. And there are 400 plus services on that portal. Those 400 services are interacted with by Mississippians every single day. So we have the opportunity to enhance what that interaction might be. And I might suggest to you that we can enhance that interaction at scale, right? Of the hundreds of thousands or millions of our citizens that interface with that on a yearly basis. There are other kinds of elements that you might think of, right? So as our population potentially diversifies, there's multilingual capabilities that can be added for citizen service. It's not just the experience that's improved with a citizen, I would suggest to you. I think it's the efficiency with which you can do it, right? Because you may be able to offload other sorts of work that way. So in terms of real world adoption, where we are now is, I think, a scenario of varied utilization of artificial intelligence. Recent studies show that the impact of AI very much depends on adoption and utilization rates. And here's a bit of where we are, I think, right now, which is really interesting to ponder, right? So again, there's this element of individual usage, right? Adoption and utilization rates, and usage, what we call at scale. In an organization at scale, in a use case at scale. And I think that's the exact inflection point of where the industry is. Public sector organizations that consistently use AI tools in their workflows see more substantial improvements of actually both job satisfaction and work-life balance with their employees. So what we're sort of beginning to hear here is this situation where you can both be more efficient, reduce cognitive load, and not only are employees doing better at what they do, recent private sector research suggests that they're happier in terms of what they do, and our citizens get served. So in addition to sort of grappling with this variation in usage, I think power users are just exceedingly important in 2024. Those individuals that might experiment more, might use these tools more, and can kind of come back and talk about it. It's a very real thing, right? Jeff actually mentioned it, right? How you write prompts, how you tweak what those prompts might say. I think fostering an environment of innovation, an environment of having power users to do those things kind of potentially lead to the greatest of benefits. But let's remember that AI adoption is complex potentially, and it's very much at the inception. AI integration in the public sector workflows isn't always straightforward. And obviously, while studies show clear productivity gains, let's not water that down. The real world complexity means that AI may be better suited to certain tasks rather than others. Now, I think our private sector partners are going to help us a great deal in assessing where those use cases are, how we can best utilize this technology in our use cases, and move ourselves forward. This complexity potentially comes at a cost down the road. You got to make adjustments to these workflows. Adopting AI requires changes in workflows, training, infrastructure. And what we want to be able to do as we scale, as we show value in these proofs of concept, we look at efficiency, we measure gains, and we move forward. Those are elements to help us make decisions about what it is that we should do. And I think that's critical. So in terms of policy considerations, Chairman, because you certainly mentioned that, I think training is of utmost importance. I think investing in training, public sector employees should receive training on how potentially to effectively use these tools. Upskilling the workforce ensures the full potential of AI to be realized, especially for power users. So I think training is absolutely critical. Now, where you get that training, how you get that training, I think there's some curation that needs to be done, but I absolutely think that training is a critical element to being able to use these tools successfully. I think we need to implement pilot programs, right? So this can be a bit of a prickly topic. Government is funded by taxpayers, and all of us take that as serious as it needs to be taken. That said, thoughtful, well-crafted proofs of value, pilot programs that help us understand where the efficiencies are, where the productivities are, and how to measure what we think those gains could be is critical. It certainly emulates what the private sector is doing. Lots of conversation today. So in addition to training, using these tools for potentially complex tasks, looking at pilots, we absolutely need to ensure that ethical and transparent use is in place. I'm sure everyone touches on that component. Transparency in some of these models is tricky. Explainable artificial intelligence or explainable machine learning is no small feat. These things are incredibly complicated. I recall an interview that I saw with Professor Jeffrey Hinton, who basically is the father of AI, the inventor of backpropagation in neural networks. And he was being interviewed on 60 Minutes, and I was actually in the kitchen cooking and sort of looking around, listening to what he was saying. And Steve Pelly was the interviewer, and Steve sort of said, well, you're building these amazing things and you sort of know what they're going to do. And Professor Hinton sort of said, yeah, kind of not really. We can sort of test them. Can they solve the New York Times connections? There's these rubrics with which they test. But I think it points to the power. Professor Hinton is a Turing Award winner, kind of a Nobel Prize winner for computing. So he's smart, as we would say. I think we really need to appreciate, we need to dive into this, but we need to appreciate the technical complexity and the skill with which it takes to not only build it, but to explain it. When you start thinking about getting a little bit more in the weeds, about signing state contracts for the use of these tools, right? There's liabilities to be considered, I think, right? If this model is generating something, these are things that are top of mind. We want to be able to think about these ethical guidelines, data privacy, and accountability. So currently, when I was putting my remarks together, there's about 500 or so AI-related policy proposals across the US that are on the table. What that tells me is folks are thinking about this, and we're thinking about this. So the good news is I think there's a lot of examples to look at. In a week or two, the team at ITS is heading to a conference where the other 49 states will be there, and our team will be able to interface and interact with what's happening in other states. It's one of many ways. All of the conversations with our business partners that presented today, but visiting with our peers in other states is another way to find out exactly where this market is, give us some really great ideas about policy proposals, ethical guidelines, that. So in terms of looking forward in the relative near term, I absolutely think we need to focus on data. It is somewhat of a less sexy kind of thing to talk about, but I think we need to potentially focus on it. Data quality, data privacy, and any security challenges. We need to potentially invest in governance and understand what that is by establishing a comprehensive governance framework to manage risk, not stifle innovation, but manage that risk appropriately to protect the citizens in our state. As I said, I think we need to be about measurement. I think we need to measure performance. I think we need to build frameworks to measure and communicate tangible value. And when we focus on measuring tangible value, I think those need to be both financial and potentially non-financial metrics, financial and non-financial metrics. And I wrote it this way on this particular bullet. I think we need to prepare for regulation. What I mean by that is I absolutely have faith in this body that any regulation that would come out would be the appropriate, but there could be federal regulations. So the business partners that we partner with are very much in tune with what that may be, right? So I think the way I wrote it is staying ahead of these evolving regulations. What might that mean? Looking at the impact of GDPR or the law in Europe, to be candid, what's in there? Looking at Senate Bill 1047 in the state of California, just to see what's in there. And I think appreciate the conversation that went on in the state assembly in that state, right? The things that they grappled with. They grappled with ethics. They grappled with these future risks that AI may pose in society. Hard things to grapple with, but they did. Near term, future-proofing public sector with artificial intelligence. So the previous measures were sort of relatively near term. Longer term, from a future-proofing or future-ready, I think we need to absolutely consider artificial intelligence as a strategic tool. Absolutely. It's going to change the way we work. It's going to change the way we live. It'll impact all elements of society. We were asked recently about artificial intelligence and workforce. We're talking about upskilling. You know, will AI take your job? So typically the answer is no. Someone that is very good at AI may be very much more qualified than you are, right? And so that's a pretty important point to consider. So AI is a strategic tool, a key enabler of innovation in the public sector, helping us to streamline operations, enhance public service delivery, and improve data-driven decision-making. Unbelievably important for a responsive, transparent, and efficient government. I think we need to focus on long-term productivity gains. So in the near term, we may be conducting pilots, we may be crafting these, but I think there's potential long-term productivity gains that we need to keep our eye on. We may be doing government very, very differently with some of these tools in the future. So while initial gains may be somewhat modest, sustained and expanded use of AI tools could potentially lead to substantial improvements in productivity in the public sector over time. I'm actually hopeful for that. And lastly, keeping our eye, and I know some of the presenters tomorrow will talk about this, on future research and development. Looking to our universities, looking to our appropriate think tanks to support ongoing research into how integration of AI in the government can all help us do our jobs better and aligning with evolving public needs. I think that's an element of the conversation that we always talk about, right? I've got a daughter who is a sophomore in college. In just a few years, she is going to be out and working, fingers crossed, and interfacing with government and have very high expectations about what her government could and should do for her. So I think we need to think about the future ready component, keeping our eye on research and development in a way that helps us to continue to innovate technically. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
I'd like to just say Mississippi is honored to have you back at ITS, and it's an honor to serve on the ITS board with you. And also, we serve on the Cybersecurity Task Force together. In keeping with that in mind, my question about that, have you given artificial intelligence any thought in the cybersecurity? And also, let me see, somebody has asked me a question. Should government agencies reveal their AI tools or not?
Yeah, so there's a wonderful, I have two colleagues, one at Mississippi State University and one at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, who I actually can't understand most of the things she says. However, they wrote a fabulous article I would suggest to you in the MIT Sloan Review called From ChatGPT to Hack GPT. And it really speaks to the power, the darker side of the power of how these tools can be used from a cybersecurity perspective. So I answered, Madam Chairman, I answered the question that way to say I think we need to keep our finger on the button of keeping pushing ahead on cyber. I think the threats will get much, much more sophisticated. And you know, it's always interesting and it's always strange to talk about. As powerful as these tools are, they're just as powerful with bad people, for the lack of a better way of saying it. So I think cyber remains top of mind. I think that where we are now, you mentioned the Cyber Review Board. That is a wonderful new whole of government approach. And I think having everyone in the room is the absolute way to go to build on the successes. I think, you know, from a public sector perspective, there may be some privacy issues on data pieces. But my sense is that, you know, whether it's a public record request or FOIA, you know, you're going to need to disclose the models that you're using and how those models work in terms of the second question, I think. You know, therein is some of the questions I think for the committees to ponder, you know, which is what is a risk profile in some of these use cases? So, you know, hallucinations got mentioned or those kind of things. So if you have a chatbot that's powered by AI and it, you know, gives a citizen incorrect information, what does that mean? I think those thought experiments are interesting in terms of understanding the power of this tool and the transparency that's needed in using the tool. As the use cases get, I would suggest to you, not necessarily at scale, broader, but deeper in terms of the decisions that it helps public sector organizations and private sector organizations make. It'll be much more nuanced in terms of disclosing that. You know, I think your other question earlier was interesting in terms of attribution, right? So if I'm writing an academic paper, attribution is wildly important. If I'm asking ChatGPT to help me with 5 talking points ideas, it's a teammate, right? So when you asked that other question and I was sitting in the audience, I thought of it as a continuum. There's a continuum somewhere, and the continuum sort of embodies judgment in terms of attribution and how we talk about how we use these tools.
Senator Delano is still listening in, but he's in his car and it's raining.
Tell him
So
on the
and I think you might have answered this already, but he asked it before you were finished. He said, what can Mississippi agencies do today to utilize the benefits of AI, or do we need to wait to get guardrails in place?
I think there's going to be a version of both, to be candid, that's happening. I think I shared with you and Chairman Williams, in coming back to ITS, meeting with agency heads directly. And as I've been doing that every day this week so far, in fact, AI comes up in every single conversation. So my take on that is we need to be pretty mindful about the development of guardrails so it doesn't stifle innovation that our agencies want to do. And at the same time, very thoughtful about these use cases. I think the use cases really matter in terms of a proof of concept or a proof of value that an agency may do in terms of potentially doing some of those in conjunction, in parallel with the development of guardrails or guidelines for the use of AI.
Anyone else have a question?
There's no questions for the last, everybody's like, we're all done. Thank you all so much for having me. It was good to see you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Ogeron. And I just want to say congratulations to you and the entire ITS staff for having the webpage that's top in the nation. That's quite an achievement to be able to do that. And it's been there for quite a while, I think. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Yes, sir.
With that, I think we're done with today. So our intent is to begin at 8:30 a.m. in the morning. Obviously, we've got weather coming that could change, but hopefully it will not. The members here, I would encourage you, if you're not currently using some type of a AI model, is to get it and start using it. It's pretty interesting, pretty challenging. And one of the conclusions I've kind of drawn today is garbage in, garbage out. The more sophisticated we ask questions, I think the more precise, concise answers we'll get. And I think that may be one of the challenges as we go forward with this, with the drift and the hallucinations that are there. But with that being said, we will adjourn until tomorrow at 8:30. Everybody have a good evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, members, if you'll check your emails in the morning before you come, if there's a delay or something, we will be emailed. Thank you.